The intellect is an after product of consciousness. It depends on form, filtered through the senses, then uses symbols, words, and numbers to organize thought. A distillation of experience only knowing a linear form of reasoning. In other words, the real self with a capital S has fallen asleep, and the logical survival state has abandoned its role as servant and cast itself groaning and complaining into the driver's seat. Don't blame yourself for this mix-up. You were born this way. Divine mind and animal body. We have speculated quite a bit in prior videos as to how this came to be, but today let's bring our attention to how the Zen masters transcend this limited outlook, and more importantly, how obvious they made it out for everyone to do, even your friend Sean. We all know what koans are, but we really don't. In the West, this word has been synonymous with the word riddle, but it is quite the opposite. Koans instead are a way of what is called in Zen direct pointing. Think of a menu versus the actual food that it represents. After having a moment of Zen or experience of the self with the cap S, it starts to seem like everyone around you is chasing nonsensical goals, as if chewing on the menu under hypnosis. The koan is a paradox to the logical mind, but already solved by the higher subtle mind. It acts as a way to snap the person eating the paper menu out of their trance by directly pointing to the food. Now, I realize that your friend Sean would probably just stare at the finger that is pointing, missing the meal that is obviously there. But at least he, for a moment, will stop chewing on the menu, and after sitting with this conscious paradox for some time, might come to the realization of the soul food that has been there all along. The goal of the koan in Zen is to lead the listener to reflect on their logical habits and break them, doing so with total ease, as this is not to be confused with earth-shattering gnosis or initiation. It is simply a return to home base, a home where everything is at peace and still. This is the world of Wu-Wei, a word that translates to effortless living. We can realize our higher mind, and when we do, the logical mind goes back into the passenger seat and lives rested and trusting of its driver who has been there since its birth. Let's take a not so logical look at these koans and see if we can snap Sean out of his hypnosis and into a higher state. And let's explore how the art of effortless living might just benefit everyone. A quick preface to this video, I want to make it clear that I am not the best example of Zen, and certainly not qualified to teach the subject. After all, it really can't be taught. I am scatterbrained, distracted, always looking fervently for the next level up. However, when I started applying the art of Wu-Wei to my life, I saw consistent, gradual change. So we will be learning together as a community, as it is absolutely true that I learn as much from you guys as you do from me, and that's a damn fact. So a proper example would be this very channel. Every video I do, I go down like 5 new rabbit holes that can be their own video and add them to the list of over 30 now that I want to get to. And it causes me to have option paralysis. But focusing on Wu-Wei has helped me flow with these ideas instead of forcing them, and I did notice a huge difference in the results of the channel after the application of this practice. And to be clear, it is a practice. Awakening may or may not happen in an instant, and it is different for everyone. Eckhart Tolle had his all at once in one sudden moment of clarity, while Goggins had to gradually work at his slowly. But in any case, to hold on to it takes practice. I mean, you could know every single rule of football. You can know all the plays by memory, but without practicing the game, you ain't worth a shit out on the field. That notion is important because these koans that we will be speaking of are said to cause instant enlightenment to those who hear them correctly. But what is less spoken about is that the listener who snapped out of his lower mind in that moment took the steps needed to maintain focus, using his or her new mind, and kept their effortless living. There is a gray area in enlightenment. It is not an on and off switch, although it is romanticized to be that way on the internet quite a bit. So our favorite Zen man of the West, Alan Watts, describes koans as working like jokes. You have to catch the punchline, see the point, and laugh all at once. If the joke has to be dissected and explained, it falls flat. So even after Sean gets the joke, he will remain bereft of laughter. This is why koans are like babies. Unlike alchemical manuscripts and religious doctrines, koans have no symbolic hidden meaning to them. You don't have to be in the know to catch the joke, basically. The point of the koan is instead so obvious that it is hard to see, as Alan says, like an eyeball trying to see itself. In fact, the more I explain the meaning of a koan, the less good I have done. There is absolutely no use whatsoever in talking about these stories and sayings. So that being said, let's talk about them. Bodhidharma came from India into China, and it was clear to all who encountered him that he was leveled up in some way. The Zen was strong with this one. So strong, in fact, that those Weeble Wobble toys that are, they're weighted at the bottom so you can kick it over and it won't ever fall down, those are derived from the likeness of this particular Buddha. Bodhidharma was not looking for disciples. No Buddhists do. But a man named Wu-Wei insisted on learning what he had attained. In true Zen fashion, Bodhi insisted to him that he had nothing to teach. But Wu-Wei did not take no for an answer. Instead, he cut off his arm and presented it to Bodhidharma while standing in the cold snow. He cried out, "My mind is not pacified. Master, pacify my mind." Where Bodhi finally says, "If you bring me that mind, I will pacify it for you." Wu-Wei said, "Well, when I search for my mind, I cannot hold it or find it." The Buddha abruptly responded, "Then it is already pacified," creating what might be the first koan, as Wu-Wei immediately got the joke, so to speak, and was thrust into his higher mind by this paradox. This paradox indicates that the seeker of peace of mind is actually looking for the one who is looking, basically solving itself through its own nonsensical nature. When we try to find that self, we notice that nothing is there to be a self. There's nothing to be affected. We instead only find patterns and relationships. Think of a whirlpool in a river. You cannot take grasp of a whirlpool because despite being a noun, it is actually a verb. The water comes, it goes, and it never returns, giving the illusion that this happening is actually a thing. The whirlpool is an empty space after all, like an empty cup. The human being is exactly the same. We are particles that come and go, occasionally storing memories that make us think we are separate persons than others. But don't let the storage folder of the memory fool you. You are also just water, like everyone else in the river, and you will come and go so swiftly that it is a wonder why anything can pain us at all. Okay, so the next one. When a civilian asks the Zen master called Tozen, "What is the Buddha nature?" which would loosely translate to "what is the truest nature of reality?" Tozen gestured to a bag of seeds nearby and answered swiftly, "This flax weighs 3 pounds," and did not bother to clarify. This is where scholars often want to attribute meaning to the number 3 or to the symbolism of the flax being seeds. And we can have a lot of fun with that kind of speculation. I mean, I certainly do. But in the way of Zen, it seems most likely that this answer was random and casual. It is the way that this deepest of questions was answered that leads to the meaning. It's a vibe. These two stories are part of a collection called The Gateless Barrier, the title of which says it all. The path that you are seeking has no obstacles, as you are already there, so relax. Thich Nhat Hanh, whose name I'm mispronouncing, once wrote, "With every step I take, I have arrived." I think it's tick, not thick, despite the H, but now I'm hoping to see memes of this particular Buddha with a big old booty and thighs on him. Oh, that's not, it's not really a pleasant thought. These koans transcend this particular literature, by the way. There is no canon here, no rules to this. There is one that I like to tell that honestly, I don't quite remember where I read it, but it has proven effective time and time again. It is said a man went to go see a doctor complaining that every time he punches himself in the leg, that it hurt like hell. He demonstrated this by continuously punching himself in the leg, exclaiming, "Doctor, look at this, it hurts." The doctor interrupted quite brassly, saying, "Well, damn it, quit punching yourself in the leg." And the man was cured. Now, you might be thinking that's dumb. Nobody would be so ridiculous. And that is the response I get when I tell that story. But that response turns to epiphany real quick when later I see, say, a coworker becoming aggravated with a project, thus making things worse, as we know that an aggravated mind will not be sharper or more clear than a mind that is at rest. Our actions and words, while aggravated, only exacerbate the problem. This is, of course, just like continuing to punch yourself in the leg after it already hurt the first time. And I'll say it. I'll say, "Hey man, quit punching yourself in the leg." And oftentimes this little metaphor is enough to cause someone to see the nonsense behind his or her destructive actions. Hell, I'll say it to myself when I've had a long week and I feel that steering wheel start to turn toward the liquor store. I'll remember, "Damn it, Joey, quit punching yourself in the leg," knowing that an instant fix will only make things worse tomorrow, and my leg already hurts like a bitch. Another from The Gateless Barrier, though, tells the story of Yokujo, who needed a monk to open a new monastery. To choose one, he placed a pitcher of water on the ground and asked his followers to tell him what it was without saying its name. The chief monk said, "Well, no one can call it a wooden shoe." But the cook named Isan walked over and kicked it over and just left. And as you might imagine, this little spill caused Isan to become the master of the new monastery because reality is beyond words. It is commented in the pages of The Gateless Barrier about this koan, that if I talk all the time and don't listen, I'll lose touch with my fellow man. In the same way, if we think all the time, we lose touch with reality, the reality outside of constant thoughts and mental categories of logic. After all, thinking all the time is like chewing on that menu that represents the food instead of the food. Alan Watts adds to this that if he wanted you to listen to music, advising you to do so would only drown out the music. The best way is to just put it on and not get in the way. The silence of meditation is like fasting from stimulation. This eventually causes us to get out of our own way and let the creative process flow into our work. We can treat life like a game and play, because after all, that is what we are doing, just playing a part for a little while. And when the play ends, the heroes and the villains both come out to greet the crowd, and together they bow. So, what was all the drama for? Ooh, that analogy sure does remind us of death and dying. Oh, we talk about that too much on this channel. So anyway, here are some great stories about death in Zen, some of which might even double as koans, come to think of it. Throughout history, Zen masters have died on purpose in the funniest ways. These stories are inspiring. They show us that the very wisest men to have ever sat the earth did not take life or death seriously. Legend has it that a truly realized being can control his heart rate, body temperature, immune system, etc. Manually, just like they can with thoughts. Well, they can also die manually, and often did for a laugh or to dish out a tough lesson. We should be reminded of Wim Hof, who has scientifically proven under MRI machines to have those first 3 superhuman abilities. And of course, Eckhart Tolle, who has proven under EKG to be able to stop his mind chatter completely for over 7 seconds. So the legends might be true, or just koans, I don't know. Dead Zen master comedian numero uno. Yao Shan shouted loudly, "The Dharma hall is falling." The monks rushed out to check the pillars and the crossbeams, where Yao Shan laughed delightedly. Mocking his students, he shouted while laughing, "None of you understood my meaning," and then just f***ing died. The student monks were overcome with grief at his death and began to mourn their loss when the Zen master woke back up for just long enough to say something along the lines of, "Hey, that's attachment, knock it off," and then re-died, this time for good, I guess. Ooh, I'm just now realizing how difficult it would be to bury someone who can do that. They probably instead took him to a taxidermist, and maybe that's where we got the idea for Furbies. He looks like a Furb. In China, there was an emperor who heard that catching the words of a Zen master often causes spontaneous awakening. He sent his servants to ask the nearest master when he would be welcome to arrive. But the Zen master told the emperor's squad of messengers, he said, "Nah, I don't have anything to teach," but kind of meant it like politicians are a waste of my time. The emperor was shocked because, well, he is pretty much the most respected figure. He sent more messengers, promising money and gold and all kinds of shit, horses or whatever. After bugging the Zen master several times, the emperor finally got an invitation scheduled to a very specific time and date. The monks led him up the mountain to the temple where the Zen master resided. Upon entering the temple, the emperor exclaimed in excitement for this Buddha to share his wisdom. And you guessed it, the Zen master looked him dead in the face, smiled, and then died right in front of him. And now that is dedication to the prank. Now, one that is not so funny but still meaningful was the story of a great warrior of immense size and kill count who was pillaging through a little town on his way to contest the Zen master. When he got to the top of the mountain and into the temple, he walked right up to the Zen master with a real threatening vibe, and the Zen master didn't flinch or even blink. This pissed off the warrior quite a bit, who declared, "Don't you see, I am the kind of man who could put his sword right through you and not even blink." The Zen master replied, "What don't you see? I am the only man who could have your sword go through me and also not blink." This caused the warrior to understand what true strength actually was. He fell to his knees before the Zen master and repented his killings, vowing to be his disciple, if so permission to be. Now, I don't know if he quite cut it as a disciple, but it is interesting to think about what was going through the warrior's head when he beheld the magnitude of this man of Zen. To the warrior, they were two men of different equations. He assumed that the Zen master was a man that was looking up at him. What he realized is that in actuality, the Zen master was not a man, but instead the consciousness this, a being looking down at both the two men, and most likely amusing itself with the interplay of these two characters. He could see that the master was not limited to his earthly vehicle and had no problem exiting the car when he so chose to. When we abandon everything to the point where there is nothing further to be abandoned, it is then that we are released from the bondage of birth and death. This is the deepest of renunciations, and also, if you ask me, a bit of a superpower. I know I can't do it, but man is the only creature that refuses to be what he is, always chasing instead of letting it come. It reminds me of giving a kiddo a laser light for cats to chase. The more urgently the cats move, the faster the kids move the dot away. But if the cat is, say, old and fat, it doesn't chase the red dot. So what do the kiddos do? They put the red dot right in front of his paws. The universe is kind of, in this way, a child's play. This old fat cat has embraced the concept of Wu-Wei. After all, L.o.t.U once said, "To desire nirvana is what keeps us from it." In the song Children of the Corn by the band Koan, the great Zen sage Ice Cube is the great Zen master. The great sage Ice Cube is versed with the statement, "Because life is a bitch, you know it is. Everybody trying to get rich. Gosh darn, all I want to do is live." You can't argue with that. You know those little helicopter seeds that fall spinning in the wind from a tree? What are they called? I don't know. But Alan compares this to the flight of a bug or an airplane as a metaphor for Wu-Wei. He asks which creature we find to be more advanced, so to speak. And we will easily say the bug and the airplane are more advanced because they can do more cool shit. But he retorts, each one of these is indeed achieving its goal, no matter how big or small. In fact, the flight of the helicopter seed thingy is far more important to the earth than the others. But this is where the Wu-Wei lesson resides. Unlike the insect, bird, aircraft, etc., the helicopter seed thingy forces no effort in its endeavor, and still the job gets done, making it, in the sense of Zen at least, the most advanced in the bunch. This reminds me of Lao-Tzu saying, "The way is not difficult to attain, just avoid choice and attachment." In our video entitled Zen and the Inner Flame, Kindling Through Friction, I gave you guys a shortcut that I use for Zazen meditation. By saying to yourself, "I wonder what my next thought will be," it tricks your brain up into going silent for just a moment. Enough time to get a taste of that state of samadhi. I would like to share another little shortcut when it comes to Wu-Wei that is equally kind of obvious but easily overlooked. When we are at a crossroads of sorts and don't know which lane to choose, well, just choose the lane that you are supposed to be in, and you know which one it is. That's the thing about this. It's so simple that we block it out with our ego. But it is like driving on the highway. When you need to choose a lane to drive in, you look and see, well, this one looks jammed and this one could be an exit, yada yada. Instead of overthinking it, just get into the lane that is going to take you to your destination and remain there until something changes. Wu-Wei, mindfulness, and so-called living in the moment does not at all mean not to plan ahead in life or to not have a strategy. This is what gets people confused, I think. We should plan things out in life, but while we are doing so, be in that moment of strategic planning and remain mindful during it. Keeping it simple like this keeps us from stressing out about the future while we are planning it. This meditative state can come with us wherever we go. I like to call this walking meditation. We don't leave the stillness of mind on the mat where we sit. We bring that equanimity with us wherever we go. And that vibe is contagious, by the way. If you are level-headed in very stressful moments, your vibe will literally, scientifically, void out the frantic vibes of others in the room. People often think that they can avoid empathetically picking up negative energy from others by brick-walling themselves from it, like they can build a bubble. But dude, forget about it, because just like photons and yawns, that shit travels through walls, literally and figuratively. Instead, we should offer ourselves into that dance of chaos and let the Wu-Wei do its work and trust that it will do so without effort. Now, this does not apply to drunk people, by the way. When intoxicated, a person is far away in sleep mode and might not even be worth the trouble. You know, I mean, make sure they are safe, but definitely embarrass the out of them the next day. Tell them that they sent a picture of their pubes to their mother-in-law and watch them go through their phone freaking out. It's great. I have fun with it. So I'll give you a couple quick koans with no explanation so that this video is at least a little Zen-like. Yang Wan asked his attendant to bring him a fan made of rhinoceros horn. When the attendant answered that it was impossible, Yang Wan directed him to, quote, "Then bring me the rhinoceros." Do they have rhinoceroses in China? Is it rhinoceroses? Rhinoceri? Hu Nang saw his monk attempting deep concentration and interrupted, saying, "Without thinking about good or bad, show me your face before your parents were born." This monk came to instant awakening after absorbing this paradox. And again, I can't help but feel that it is the tone or the delivery of these words that level up students so instantly. You know, it's a vibe. The monk then asked him, "Besides this, is there anything else? Are there other secret doctrines?" The master replied to him, "Nothing I've said to you is secret. If you look within, you'll find all secrets." In another one, a governor challenged Zazen about an inaccurate passage in the sutras, claiming it says that there's a poppy seed within Mount Kunlun and that within that poppy seed is the mountain. And he went on, "Now I can understand how there could be a poppy seed within the mountain, but it's nonsense to suggest that a poppy seed could contain a mountain." Zazen responded, "Governor, I've been told that you've read as many as 10,000 books." "That's very likely," the governor proudly stated, where the Zen master replied, "But your head is no bigger than a coconut. How could it possibly contain 10,000 books? The governor was speechless, not awakened, but it's fun to think about that maybe he just fainted from hearing that bomb mic drop. A poem by L.o.t.U of the Soto Zen Temple has a spot that reads, "Both roots and branches must return to their origin, and so do respectful and insulting words." That's a good one. And one from the Heart Sutra, "Long seeking it through others, I was far from reaching it. Now I go by myself. I meet it everywhere. It is just I myself, and I am not itself. Understanding this way, I can be as I am." It's like that one's like paradoxical and makes sense at the same time. There's definitely a middle path to some of these. Let's wrap this bitch up by saying that explaining Zen is like putting legs on a snake. It's silly at best. So I'll leave you with one final koan. There are 3 people peeling potatoes. The student is not thinking about the potatoes, but instead wondering what it's all about and why we peel them. The apprentice peels the potatoes and wonders how this act can be applied to better his practice. The master, however, well, he just peels the potatoes. see them fall, I see them all, and I see them come, I see them go, I see them completely still, I see them reap, I see them sowing, I see them grow, I see the one split off into the multitudes. You can't go yet, dear. But when I get there, I'll still be here. I'm still right here. Darkness calls me, you're alone, my dear. But when I answer, we can leave here. Where I'm going, you can't go yet, dear. But when I get there, I'll still be here. The year is -1,000,000 or some shit. You and your cousin are down at the river collecting some crawdads and fish to bring home to feed your family, when you see an enormous shadow encompass the ground. You both dive into the water because you know exactly what this shadow is. Unfortunately, your cousin's body never splashes down into the river because two gigantic clawed hands the size of Jeremy Corbell's balls swoop down on a 20-foot wingspan and rip his feet off of the earth. You know that there is no surviving this, but you don't grieve because this shit happens all the time. Instead of grieving, you're hypnotized by the most heinous sound of your cousin being shredded into little bite-sized pieces to be fed to the babies of this gigantic bird of prey. As the gargled screaming starts to die down, you realize that you are in the water. Jumping in the water made sense to avoid this first problem, but you now realize that you have an entire new set of problems. As you scramble and scrape mud to get back on land, you feel the entire bottom of the riverbed move beneath your feet. Again, you are well aware of this familiar and dreadful notion of everyday life, as nature's equivalent of a vice grip the size of a Greyhound bus clamps down on your pelvis and begins spinning in the form of a barrel roll. While spinning, your head comes up above the water for just long enough for your body to be slapped back down into the water, completely knocking the wind out of you, because unlike your friend who was eaten alive, you are lucky enough to be drowned instead. As you are somewhat relieved by that notion, several other smaller versions of this vice grip clamp down onto your hands, arms, knees, feet, and ass. It turns out this gargantuan crocodile also had babies. Just as you lose consciousness, you realize the irony that being fed to these offspring is not any different from what you were going to do with the fish and the crawdads that you were collecting that day. Not once during this absolutely mortifying ordeal did anything cross your mind along the lines of credit scores, bills, jobs, schooling, and certificates. Because here in this place and time, you are not a person, you are food. Welcome to the everyday life of the early Denisovans and many other species of human beings that have mysteriously went extinct. But for those who survived, a day came that was a total game changer that would set the course of life in a completely different direction for your entire species. Through primitive grunts or brassly drawn symbols on stone, word spreads that there is a way to be completely immune from this brutality of Foodchain. Later that week, as you approach the glowing light that so far in your life has been merely viewed at a distance, you realize that this glow is not trying to eat you like the rest of the world is. Being no longer afraid but respectful of this ominous glow, you realize that every other creature on this planet is deathly afraid of the flame, but you no longer are, and you and your kin settle down to get warm near this newfound sanctuary. You find peace for the first time, a peace in which you didn't even realize you could experience. For the first time, your species were within a bubble that would not be penetrated by the monsters surrounded you. You can keep your eyes fixed on this glow instead of having your head on a swivel 24/7. The glowing eyes that you know are in the distance belonging to creatures whose one and only goal is to can kill you, only watch in amazement from a distance because you have conquered a part of nature that no other species ever has. Aeons later, a brilliant mind belonging to Manly P. Hall would coin the prana, or divine spark within us, as an archetype called the inner flame. And this is no coincidence because as your head comes off that swivel and you gaze into that fire completely still, you become the first human being to look within. There are still monsters though. To hide from the cats, you could go into the nooks and crannies of earth. To hide from the crocodiles of the water, you could climb up a tree. To hide from the giant birds of prey, you could go into the caves. But in every single one of these places of safety is the giant and cunning serpent waiting for you. Unable to escape the serpent, you had to fight, later creating a mythology that is still used worldwide. But now at the center of your people is a glowing light that none of those creatures would dare approach. Even though you are not yet at the top of the food chain, you have found a way to transcend it. For you, this is simply relaxation. Those who gazed into that fire would continue looking deeper inward, finding more and more of the worlds blooming within us all. Life for your species slowly begins to turn from survival mode to exploration of the self, an activity that would later be called Zen. The world that we all live in today has an entirely new kind of monster. A monster that, instead of eating our flesh, wants to consume us by our toils. But being that we are the same as our ancestors were, there sure as is a way to transcend these monsters as well. So that was a little bit too brutal, but it kind of makes me wonder if this might have led to the mythology of the fire-breathing dragon. Considering that fire kept us safe from the beasts that ate us, the one fear that would be left is those very same monstrous creatures also harnessing this incredible power. That might be for another episode involving Joseph Campbell and whatnot. Whereas today I'd like to talk some about Dogen. To be clear, I am in no way, shape, or form enlightened in any way, but I am curious, and this so happens to be one of my favorite subjects to read about. And being that reading is very calming as well as the practice of Zen, I would recommend to anybody with anxiety to combine these two activities. So, although the Zen masters did very little writing themselves, we are lucky to have preserved the records of those who spoke with these realized beings. And when I say realized beings, that is exactly what I mean down to the word. It's my understanding that if you were to call one of these great Zen masters enlightened, or as they termed it back then, a Buddha, which is more of a title than a name, not to be confused with Siddartha, who often is coined as the original Buddha. They might respond by saying that you are a Buddha as well, basically meaning that you also are enlightened, but just haven't realized it yet. In a way, just by being conscious and able to ponder your own being, you are in fact enlightened. But we do a really good job of ignoring that. These realized beings simply realized that they are, and that you are too, despite being a little distracted right now. Quite a few Zen masters are just born this way. However, it is inspiring to know that even the original Buddha, as we mentioned being Siddartha, was not at all born enlightened. He had to realize the bitter truths of death, sickness, and famine before he sat under that tree and realized his own Buddhahood. Now, before you comment, a correction on that, yes, I am aware that legend has it that when Siddartha was born, he could instantly speak and walk and declared himself to be the enlightened one. But that seems to me a bit of an archetypal legend that applies to all Buddhas as opposed to the one individual man. In the mythology of the individual man, Siddartha, there was a great deal of suffering involved before so-called enlightenment took place. And once becoming this painless being, he vowed to reincarnate on Earth as many times as necessary to alleviate the suffering of all creatures of Earth. This obviously hasn't happened yet. And in a way, this really goes against my hypothesis in the prior video about us coming to Earth to learn of suffering as a form of a school. Despite this contradiction with my own hypothesis, I still like the idea and I would like to explore it. I could be flat wrong about my own ideas, which is honestly derived from Gnostic teachings of the West, or this legendary vow to relieve the suffering of all Earth creatures might just be an example to live by. If we all consider ourselves the reincarnation of Siddartha, well, in that way, it would greatly alleviate the suffering of Earth. And perhaps that's the idea. Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps it is a school until we all learn enough to get our shit together in order to alleviate the suffering of each other's despite our own. Perhaps the individual as a school takes place until the entire planet is ready to ascend as one creature. If we are all born of the earth, that is to say our physical bodies, it doesn't seem that strange to think that we cannot transcend the boundaries of suffering without everyone being on board. Just like a healthy body can be athletic, but if there's only one little bit of cancer within, the whole body dies with the cancer. The cancer is ignorant to the fact that it is killing itself by the very same means that it is a parasite to the body. It just consumes and consumes until the body dies, and thus the cancer dies with it. And that is, if you ask me, truly an archetype for ignorance. The entire idea of transcendence from suffering begs the age-old question of free will. That is, do we truly have free will, or is everything already predetermined? But here's the thing. This is another example of human duality thinking, having to choose one thing or another, and not at all realizing that it can be both. And before we go and call that a paradox, let's think about the common used example for proof of predetermination. Those who claim that everything is predetermined use the example of the pool table as a metaphor of the Big Bang. They say that once that first cue ball is struck and the balls scatter in their own individual directions, it is predetermined where they land depending on how that first ball was struck. And this is true, I cannot deny that. They feel as if free will would be the equivalent of, say, the 8-ball waking up and then making a drastic right-angle turn, like the Kennedy bullet, on its own accord. Due to the Hermetic principle of cause and effect, this can never happen and will never happen, thus hinting at predeterminism and not free will. But we seem to forget that we are not the pool balls in this metaphor. We are the ones holding the cue. We are the ones holding the stick, and depending on how we strike that first white ball determines the results of our reality. Once we realize that we are the ones holding the stick, we slowly begin to understand that we have free will. We have free will over this pool table. Once we begin to realize that we are the ones holding the stick, we slowly begin to understand that we have free will over this pool table, or reality if you will. And you will. One might argue that striking the first cue ball, representing the Big Bang, means that we have nothing to do with the results. But that logic only holds up if time exists. And we are all aware of the fact of time being an illusion. We have forgotten that we are the Big Bang, that we caused the Big Bang, and therefore can cause those cue balls to roll in any direction that we so please. We project and control reality. Now it's just time to realize it. And realizing that gets us back to that primordial first cause, holding the cue stick and going back to that source in a way is a form of shedding all of the preconceived notions that we have accumulated and returning to the source of all things, which is consciousness. Within timeless space, this is immortality, and I'm not using a metaphor here. It's time that we accept that. But we refuse to accept it because we see ourselves as separate from the rest of the cue balls, thus separate from nature. When we look at artwork inspired by Zen, we see that there's no focal point or character within the images as personified by a separate being. In fact, when there are people in this artwork, they seem to blend in with the rest of the background image, as if there is no distinction between them and the rest of the world. Now, I don't know if this is on accident or illustrated as a point to be made, but it sure does make me ponder the oceans of separateness that we have built like a wall between us and the rest of reality. As reality, that is to say, nature curves and wiggles and fractals out into spiraling geometrical beauty, we are busy building cubes and right-angle corners to shove into with all of our stuff. Getting into an airplane and flying overhead seems to make this almost disturbingly clear. You might just go ahead and look out your window right now and see that humans have altogether denied their source, being Gaia. Yes, we are the blooming flowers of this magnificent plant, but we have to ask ourselves, what happens when we cut the flower away from its source? It f***ing dies. It might take a little bit of time, but the flower dies. As above, so below. If we look at the Fibonacci sequence that is obvious in things as big as galaxies, all the way down to plants, microscopic beings, and, well, us. It is truly a perplexity as to how we have pervaded in ignoring that. With our cubes that are based on practically no sacred geometry whatsoever. However, this wasn't always the case. The Parthenon, which is an ancient Greek temple, is based off of Fibonacci sequence. The great artists like Da Vinci painted according to this very same mathematical fingerprint, so to speak. Our modern homes, despite being creative on occasion, are a long flight from our ancient ancestors who built their homes within the rock walls of cliffs and harnessed the power of nature to create their shelter. Take, for example, the teepees of the Native Americans. But that's just the thing is, if we have a bunch of stuff to protect, a teepee doesn't work, does it? So in order to keep your slimy hands off of my stuff, I have to build a cube in order to keep from sharing with you. And you can hide your shit in your cube. So I have my stuff and you have your shit. You ever notice that your shit is stuff and other people's stuff is shit? That's weird. Like, hey, Jeremy, go get your shit. This is my stuff. We seem to mince language like that, and I'll have to give Carlin that credit, by the way. Everybody meet Cleopatra. This is not Dr. Pickles. This is Dr. Pickles' brother. He's gonna step on something and hit a button and fuck this all up, but so be it. She seemed to, or he, it's a cat, so I call it a she, it's an accident. She didn't mess up L.o.T.U. Good going there. She'll drink my coffee, though. Zen master Dogen is often accredited with conjuring the activity of Zazen. There are a million books and videos on how to go about Zazen accurately, so we won't go into it here, but it is important to remember the why of the purpose of Zazen. She fucked up L.o.T.U. L.o.T.U's gonna have to move up to the mountains again. You can sit up here with all the other Zen masters. The why of Zazen, I suppose, can be kind of summed up as a way to train consciousness, a way of tuning it, so to speak. The states of ecstasy experienced by those avid in meditative practice is no accident. It almost seems as if we are designed to experience this departure from distracted thinking. In the West, we define wisdom as knowledge put into action, whereas in the East, wisdom seems to be the opposite. Unlearning knowledge is the case in the East. But I suppose this would be akin to shedding programming. These states of ecstasy that come with Meditation has been called a departure from one's ordinary state of mind, but I feel as if it is more akin to discovering your original state of mind. Just like what we've learned in the prior videos about gnosis, this state of ecstasy cannot be realized from outside stimulation, but must be discovered in one's own experience. This, of course, will lead people to have a notion of spirituality or mysticism automatically associated with the act of Zazen, but this could not be further from the truth unless you so choose. So I think we should imagine the practice of Zazen as a vehicle that we drive like a car. The car has no predetermined destination, therefore has no purpose without the driver. The car can go anywhere that the driver takes it. It is up to the driver to decide and then function this vehicle toward the desired destination, whether that destination is to read clearly the message coded in our DNA or to shed prior belief systems, or even to have a clear head before a science exam and whatnot. The destination or results is not picked out for you by Zazen. It's simply a tool to be better acquainted with oneself in order to explore the desired results with a clearer outlook. I could go on for an entire video alone about how science backs up the results of Zazen, but the chances are that you've already seen these results and there's plenty of videos out there. Despite that being important, I don't feel the need to go into it here. Instead, I would like to talk about some misconceptions about Zazen, as well as a couple cheat codes that can be used to induce these states of ecstasy naturally. One misconception right off the bat seems to be the desire for enlightenment, which we have already ascertained is already there within you. That was actually Dr. Pickles. Don't worry about it, leave it. So instead, Zazen should be somewhat of a maturing process in order to purify the fight or flight response that comes with the ox. That is to say, our animal nature. Today's age has monetized meditation and added its own completely baseless notions and attachments to it. That's ironic. For example, this big fuss about transcendental meditation, or TM, is blowing up, and everything represented by Bob Roth on the subject of meditation completely goes against what Dogen originally set out to do. And this, in many ways, is just a money grab. We are told to count our breaths or repeat a random yet somehow expensive mantra in our heads to achieve this state of ecstasy. But this is not only missing the point, but defeats the purpose altogether. It should go without saying, but if any presentation of meditation requires a form of money, it's bullshit. Counting breaths is great for breathing exercises. Repeating a mantra is perfect for spiritual practices. But somehow these get entwined into the practice of Zazen and meditation. Dogen did none of these things. When sitting in Zazen meditation, there is absolutely no way to fuck it up. You don't have to keep yourself in check or stick to any particular guideline. That doubt will only pull you further away from the gnosis that Zazen has to offer. Nothing ritualistic or extra has ever been a core component of meditation. And let me clarify what I mean here. In meditation, if there is something to be done, if there is something to be achieved, it too is not Zen. Even the act of trying to clear your mind, as popularized by so many practitioners, is itself a chore and something that has to be tried for. And besides that, clearing your mind is completely futile. Yes, eventually reaching a state of no thought will occur, but that in no way, shape, or form is where a person should start. We should look at meditation like fasting. In the way that fasting means to refrain from food, meditation is a way to fast from external stimulation and distraction. We are constantly taking in information from the outside world 100% of our life. Even when asleep, our brain will present us with dreams that are also a form of stimulation, but from within. When sitting in meditation, feel free to let your thoughts run wild and don't try to make any attempt to ignore them in some kind of short-sighted goal of clearing the mind. This is just adding more thoughts onto the thoughts. The key here is to let whatever happens within happen without being influenced by any outside stimulus. We are literally fasting from the intake of information. This will eventually take us far beyond the capability of the five senses, where reality is real and not an illusion. In the practice of meditation, there is a proper way to sit and techniques to remain still. These techniques are very helpful, not necessarily be concerned with during the act or non-action, that is, of meditation. By all means, put your feet on your knees and straighten your back and tilt your head and all that stuff. But once in position, we need to forget about whether or not we are doing this correctly. Take this opportunity to explore and dig around the worlds within yourself. You would be amazed how well you can get to know yourself just by letting thoughts completely run rampant without any sort of inhibitions or suggestibility from the outside. The way that you conduct meditation is going to vary from anyone else, as this is not a one-size-fits-all activity. Here is what seems to work for me personally. After getting into the proper position as suggested by Dogen, I allow my thoughts to flow. I have learned to trick myself up by asking the question, I wonder what my next thought will be. For whatever reason, this causes a delay in my next thought, and there is a short space of no thought in which I can rest for a moment. But then sure as fuck a thought occurs to me and I look at it and I acknowledge it, and then I ask myself again, I wonder what my next thought will be. After a brief pause, certainly another thought occurs and I repeat this process. After observing a series of thoughts, I draw a line, so to speak, between them and start to recognize a pattern. I'll see that, this thought led to that thought, and that thought led to this thought, and so on. By connecting these dots, you slowly start to form a better understanding of how your thoughts flow and why. But most importantly, where those thoughts come from and the source of them. You can literally trace those thoughts through that pattern that will lead you directly to the primary source of your own contemplative thinking patterns. This takes time and is never actually completed, but simply understanding where your thoughts are coming from and why and how they morph and evolve, you can better understand yourself and the way it dictates the way you act and speak. If you are honest with yourself enough to admit your failures and shortcomings and even the portions of your psyche that you are ashamed of that will arise during this observation or watching of thought patterns, so to speak, it will cause you to completely reevaluate your knee-jerk reaction to the outside world around you. Meditation seems to make it clear that we do in fact have an immediate response system to outside stimuli. This is completely unnecessary though, except for in the case of survival, like not being eaten by a predator. This quick twitch response system is no longer necessary, considering that being eaten by predators is no longer an issue for our species. Teaches us Gnostically how to insert a pause between a happening and your response to the happening. This pause is quite literally the biggest game changer to your entire life. Pause is what takes us from autopilot and moves us into self-awareness. This self-awareness and acceptance of our wholeness is what causes us to radiate certainty in our daily lives. I don't need science to confirm to me what the ancient Zen masters have mastered. I mean, this is kind of the same thing as what's going on nowadays with the government acknowledging the existence of off-world vehicles and non-human biologics. I appreciate that they are acknowledging these facts, but if you ask me, they are really behind on the subjects that we have already come to understand. So in a way, they are not confirming anything for us. When science tells us that meditation works and the government tells us that UFOs are real, my reaction is a simple, yeah, we know. Welcome to the party, face. You're late. The archetype of the ox. It's a powerful creature, but he does not have our best interest in mind. If the ox is not tamed, it will run wild and cast our character astray. However, through meditation, self-contemplation, and Zazen, that ox begins to calm down. Thus goes the parable of riding the ox home. Instead of getting rid of the ox or denying it, we can use the power that it has in the direction that properly meets our personal destinies. So instead of walking away from the ox and becoming free yet incomplete, it is best to be a shepherd to the ox, therefore, in a metaphorical sense, riding the ox home. All of a sudden, we don't have to put the effort into walking, as the ox will now use its powerful legs to our benefit. The problem is not that this process is complex. In fact, it's very simple. The problem is that it requires extreme discipline. It requires abstinence from everything that your ego finds to be desirable. This is also a form of fasting. To go without, hence fasting in many different forms, is a way of emptying our cup, so to speak. Once the cup is empty, we are then able to receive fresh and new insight. When it comes to Zen, emptiness is a perfect metaphor. Having a strict belief system can only inhibit our behavior and thus cornering us to a specific destiny. When the mind becomes empty and free of ideals and stark beliefs, we are free to roam without being tied to any preconceived inhibitions. The original Buddha we mentioned earlier, called Siddartha, he said, "Don't believe anything that I say if it doesn't line up with your own truth," or something like that. The translations vary, but he is basically admitting that the ideas that he is putting forward should not be confused with a specific belief system that is to be adhered to. This inner flame that we are born with can be used to burn off all of the extra baggage that we carry on our backs. Just like the flame once upon a time would ward off any predatory creatures that crave blood, the flame within can also be utilized to ward off any kind of threat to our well-being from outside predatory and parasitical people and events. But this flame has to be kindled. The same as the primordial man having to utilize friction between sticks and stone to painstakingly create fire. We can very well utilize friction within ourselves to kindle that inner flame. However, instead of sticks and stones causing that friction, what we have at our disposal is discipline and sacrifice. Things that hurt now, but save our lives later. It is a pain in the ass to create literal fire from nothing. So it should be no surprise that it will be an equal pain in the ass to kindle the inner flame that we are born with. The pain in the ass that I speak of is basically to abstain from the things that bring you pleasure day to day, and in cases do the opposite of those activities, which is to do something hard and difficult. Paradoxically though, the activity of Zazen meditation is one of the easiest things a person can do, yet it is the quickest way to find out how to kindle that flame and cause it to become ablaze. Once this fire is ablaze, it will be noticed by outside components, parallel to predators and parasites in the form of those who wish to better themselves through our misfortune. Once this fire is on, it does not go unnoticed. Just like the big cats hoping to eat the primordial man, but don't dare come near them due to the fire, those who are selfish and ignorant, who wish to harm us in the world, will not dare to feed on your shortcomings once they catch the vibe of that flame within you, that flame that you radiate with. Utilize the friction of shortcomings, failures, with sacrifice, and that friction, just like the sticks and the stones of primordial man, will ignite that fire within you that causes you to be able to choose your own destiny at your own will. Just like our example of the pool table. Instead of being a cue ball that is sent in a direction and is unable to wake up to make its own destination, you therefore become the one holding the cue. You don't need a 400-page book to change your life. Sometimes when something clicks and you recognize it as truth, it becomes who you are. And when it becomes who you are, all of a sudden you don't have to talk about your philosophy. You don't have to talk about being righteous. You simply embody that philosophy. You become it. Therefore, walking the walk instead of talking a whole bunch of shit. The very first sentence in Joseph Campbell's masterpiece, Myths of Light, reads as follows: "Myths do not belong in the rational mind. Rather, they bubble up from deep in the wells of what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious." I think what happens in our mythology here in the West is that the mythological archetypal symbols have come to be interpreted as facts. What old JC is trying to say here is that we take everything literally. Therefore, we consider myths to be false instead of symbolic. Symbology is a language all its own that can be understood by anyone with an open eye, despite any language barriers. While visiting my friend Mike and Katie, I noticed a statue of the head of Siddartha mounted on his balcony. This is a head of the Buddha that we've all seen 1,000 times, but for some reason it struck me in a new way. It was as if my eyes could now see the language that this head was silently speaking. I had already known that the oddball haircut represented snails, as myth has it that the Buddha, Siddartha, was so still while sitting under that tree that snails found it to be a very pleasant and easy home. This caused me to realize the large-ass ears in comparison to the mouth, which was small. I think it goes without saying that this represented the Buddha's ability to listen before speaking. This led me to how large the eyes were. Eyes are unusually large for a human being, representing the ability to see, I would suppose, but they are closed. I sat with that for a moment, pondering what could be the meaning of this. This question seemed to answer itself when I looked at the space between the eyes. And well, there is that tiny dot that we've all seen. Despite Siddartha having incredible vision to see through all of the suffering and bullshit that caused him to sit under that tree, he decided to shut off his sharpened, dualistic eyes and instead chose to use the one in the center. This, of course, as you know, represents the third eye, or pineal gland, in conjunction with the pituitary gland that fuels it, causing it to be a sort of transducer or a receiver of higher information. And none of these observations were particularly earth-shattering, but it created a sense of unease within me. I began to realize that amongst all of this, quote, love and light and we are all one type slogans that are by all means true, but watered down and repeated like a broken record, these phrases are either too simple or just outright misunderstood. Either way, I got a strong feeling that something has been overlooked. I realized that I needed this symbology to be broken down in a language to better understand, which, I mean, despite being impossible, of course, might lead me to a more modern understanding of the symbology. Being born in today's age, it seems as if I needed something a little bit closer in time-space to comprehend fully what I was looking at. But rereading the Tao-Te-Ching or the Upanishads and the Dhammapada or even Carl's unique take on Eastern philosophy was not going to cut it this time. I needed something rare, but close to the source, yet at the same time could speak to me in English. My thirst became completely quenched after discovering the missing works of L.o.t.U, a book of recorded conversations between a prince and Lao-Tzu himself, an ancient and overlooked text called the Wu-Wei. While reading it, not only was I perplexed at how this ancient manuscript has been so slept on, but I began began to think, how is this not front page news? Because within the codex are symbolical breakdowns of modern day understandings like space-time, quantum physics, and even clear as day predictions of the future. I was absolutely astounded by every passage. I would like to read some of my favorite portions of it here today, but before we get to that, I can't ignore the synchronicity that struck right after this realization. After peering at Siddartha's head, I went to open my phone to take a picture, and I saw an email from one of you, an email from a YouTuber that goes by the name Joey Bible. The email began with a disclaimer that he didn't even really know why he was sending this information, but he felt like it'd be helpful to the channel. Unbelievably so, the email went on to list several misconceptions about how we view Siddartha and non-dual thinking in general. For example, Siddartha is almost always depicted with several serpents coming up from behind his head and then forming an umbrella above his entire body. Like the face of Tutankhamun with birds and serpents coming from his forehead, I assumed that this was a symbol for Kundalini, although it be a bit unconventional, considering that the Kundalini has always been depicted as twin serpents, 2 and not 7-fold. Joey pointed out that what was actually happening here was called Mukalinda. As the Buddha sat under the tree, heaven darkened for 7 days and there were terrible storms on earth. The serpent beings that I mistook for Kundalini were in fact Nagaraja, a species known as the Nagas, or as we have seen on this channel several times, anthropomorphic reptiles. The Nagas, like many other reptilian creatures in mythology, are said to be semi-divine, humanoid serpent beings that come from the underworld. I was dumbstruck. I realized that the part I had been missing all along was obvious. The mountain is high because the valley is low. You see, all this talk about love and light and all is one kind of derailed me from seeing this obvious missing piece in the mythology of the Buddha. That missing piece was darkness. But why would a reptilian humanoid from the underworld, that is to say the fight or flight portion of our brain, have anything to do with protecting Siddartha during his meditation? Why would a creature of darkness bother to help Siddartha in his quest to end all suffering on earth? These questions, of course, cannot be answered with mouth noises, so come with me while we turn our attention to the beautifully illuminated world of symbols and allegory. Joseph Campbell has stated that mythology is composed by poets out of their insights and realizations. Mythologies are not invented, they are found. You can no more tell us what your dream is going to be tonight than we can invent a new myth. Myths come from our essential experience, and end quote. We know that the Brahma is said to be seated on a lotus. When he closes his eyes, worlds come into existence, including our own, and when he opens his eyes, everything ceases to be, indicating that we are living within his dream. If we connect that to an ancient fable called the humbling of Indra, it indicates that all of the galaxies in space are each a single lotus, each one with its own Brahma. This leads me on a wild speculation about the nature of our reality in relation to black holes, as it is hypothesized that each galaxy has a gigantic black hole at its center. This could very well be a video on its own, but let's keep on point here to answer our initial question. The lotus flower, or rose in the West, is often associated with the area of the heart. Myth has it that the Buddha was born from his mother's side, being born from the heart chakra as opposed to his mother's genitalia, which resides at the pelvis region, the lower chakras, leaving the mother's heart exposed. This reminds me of the Christian allegory of Eve being made from the ribcage of man. Man, being the scum of the earth, gave life from his heart center for the sake of woman. With his ribcage now removed, his heart is now exposed, particularly to his counterpart being a woman. This does not surprise me at all, considering I think that men everywhere will agree that their greatest weakness is, in fact, well, yeah.
We've all been there. The lotus flower and its beauty arises from the mud and the filth from the bottom of a pond, as parallel to the rose symbol in the West, which, despite being equally as beautiful, has thorns towards its base. In both cases, we are not able to have beauty at the top without something more heinous at the bottom. The name of the heart chakra is an interesting and unexpected translation, being called the anatta. The anahata translates to no impact. When looking into what this term no impact is alluding to, I found that two things, dual things, colliding is what makes sound, or cymatics. By indicating no impact, we are led to a paradox, that is the question, what is the sound not made by two things colliding? Einstein made it clear that energy and mass are the same thing. So adverse to that is this so-called not sound. Well, in the tradition of Zen, taking dual aspects and uniting them into one seems to refer to the sound of one thing, one primordial thing, the sound that we call the Om. In the West, it is referred to as logos, or the word. Om is often spelled A-U-M by the original patriarchs. The A is representing the wakeful state, that is your primary consciousness, perceiving all that is not you. The U represents the dream state. You are aware and you can see, but only things that come from within, hence you. The M represents dreamless sleep, or in other words, the very thing that we cannot describe with words. This little piece of symbology is fun, considering that the M sound is indeed the sound of the mouth closing. Therefore, no speech. I mean, there really are no accidents here. To chant this sacred sound during meditation is intended to unite all three of these elements together. And that, of course, alludes us to the Western idea of the Holy Trinity. The Star of David has a triangle pointing up and a triangle pointing down. This obvious symbol of the old adage, as above, so below, seems to be the earth reaching up to heaven, meanwhile, heaven reaching down to earth. Parallel to the Star of David, in the east, there is the symbol of the Buddha's footprints, each with repeated circles within the center of them, kind of like the Hamza symbol that we're familiar with. These circles that represented in a myriad of mandalas all over the world is engraved in the center of each foot. So despite being divine beings, much like the lotus in the mud and the Rosicrucian heart wielding thorns, these divine beings still have feet with dirt on them. And with our hands, or singular eye, as represented in the Hamza symbol, we are able to make contact with the divine. But we're limited to the feet, as indeed we are here within the black cube on Earth. And of course, I always seem to come back to Carl on a lot of these things, but I can't ignore his wisdom that often appears in his one-liners, like, the reason man cannot find God is because he is not looking low enough. I can't help but be inspired by how completely different people from completely different cultures always seem to come to similar conclusions after years of introspection. This reminds me of a lesser used depiction of the Buddha symbol. He is often seen seated on a lotus, of course, but there are many depictions of him with one hand or one finger gently touching the ground. This is his spot, and it is your spot as well, right here, right now, right where you're sitting. In a way, you don't have to leave. You are already on the ground. 'Cause I'm already standing on the ground. Shut up! I can sing on my own show if I want to. That's a great song, by the way. This is called Bhumi Parsha. And a side note, I personally love this depiction of lightly touching the ground. It's like an effortless just boop of the hand. And it's just so on point and relaxed. It is not forcing anything, but instead simply kind of invites you in for a cup of tea. This symbol for grounding simply means that he is not moved by desire or fear, but only by dharma, that is his social duties, as we all have. And that balance between the esoteric and our everyday social duties can be acquired here very simply in this allegory. His hand gently touching the ground doesn't always mean to sit still, but instead to carry that stillness with you and into your social duties, that is to say, your own dharma. Side note, it's kind of funny how the word social and duties are put together so easily. And if you don't get that joke, just go ask a 5th grader to translate it for you. Let's not get confused about this freedom from desire. This in no way means to be ignorant of attachment, suffering, and sexual desire. As we know that the allegory of the Buddha understood all too well the nature of pain and suffering, as well as the temptation of sexual desires, as opposed to ignorance of it. It simply means to understand these parts of ourselves and then to transcend them. Very tricky for some of you players out there, but certainly a lot easier for people who are virgins, such as myself. Baby Buddha, we can call him the BB, took 7 steps representing the 7 chakras, and then his hands moved into an all too familiar formation. His right hand pointed to the heavens and his left hand pointed downward. This has been seen in so many cultures that I can't even begin to list them here. One of my favorites is the Da Vinci painting of the Christ pointing to the heavens, with a hand gesture that seems to be absolutely beyond gentle and relaxed. His hand is not stern or tightened up in any way, but just instead an effortless connecting with the divine, while at the same time acknowledging his understanding of the more hellish worlds below. And surprising or not, this same symbol depicted by the Christ is also depicted by the Baphomet. However, the hand gestures here seem to be more intense, more rigid, and this almost seems to remind me of the difference between a good trip and a bad trip, whereas both are necessary in the case of gnosis. And true gnosis. Within the Mahayana, there is an allegory of a ferry boat that is used to cross a river. This river, representing turmoil, can be crossed to a new place of no pain and no suffering, but at the same time, well, no worldly pleasures. But just like any ferry boat, there is, of course, a toll to be paid. This toll is to give up all ideals, belief systems, and attachments, basically moving from samsara to nirvana. That wasn't scripted. What? Don't judge me. I'm just saying that sometimes regular bands and regular artists are deified because of their death. You'll notice that if I get killed for making these videos, I'll probably be remembered in a good light. All right, you don't want to hear about that, all right. This ferry boat represents the esoteric teachings, while the river seems to represent the chaos of the world. And ironically enough, within the Mahayana, when the passengers reach the yonder shore, they can't help but wonder at that time and place what the prior shore looks like. They might now ask themselves, I wonder what's going on in the world of samsara. I wonder what's going on in the mud now that I'm sitting atop the lotus, so to speak. And in a way, the old adage rings out still that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. A paradox that we all get fucked with on a daily basis. Myths, allegories, and symbols are a streamline of thoughts throughout generations that are unobstructed, unmolested, and uncensored by those who consider themselves overlords of the world. All of our current information is sanitized by an authoritative figure due to his own bias and belief system, or in most cases, control systems, as we learned in the previous video before this one, systems of control. This censorship of information cannot be done with mythology. Mythology, of course, being that central knowing point within all of us that cannot be touched by any singular influence. It is carried in the hearts of mankind. You can ignore it all you want, but it's still going to pop up in your movies and in your literature and within the obstacles of your everyday life. So we might want to start paying attention. Speaking of paying attention to the lesser known wisdom of the world, let's jump in as promised to the wise words buried within the Wu-Wei. Let's be clear about something. There is no definitive proof that this text was written based on the words of Lao-Tzu himself. Much like the work of William Shakespeare, who never actually existed, this text seems to be most likely an amalgamation of many Zen masters who well understood the teachings of Lao-Tzu. Thus, like I was looking for in the first place, a connection between something that is too ancient for my modern brain to comprehend and a verbal language that seems to light a candle in the direction of these teachings to our current cultural eyes in our modern society. Just like the Upanishads here, this text is not a manuscript, but instead a conversation between a teacher and a student. That student being a prince, ironically enough. Lao-Tzu had no social patriarchy whatsoever. He was just simply the wisest man. He did not crave power in any way, shape, or form. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a politician. But they all sought him out, especially when he was leaving for the mountains. They chased him down. They didn't want him to leave. So in a way, and I do mean loosely speaking, it is as if the actual anonymous authors of this text might have been channeling the message of Lao-Tzu from within their own collected consciousness. So I'm gonna start here. Kind prince, said the master, suppose a person cuts himself loose from being fooled by the senses. Can he then become attached to the fruit of his enlightenment? This is a question posed by Lao-Tzu to test his student. The student replied, no, venerable teacher. The one who has succeeded in cutting himself loose from attachment to the senses cannot then fasten himself to what he has attained. To do so would be to return to the enslavement of the senses, and the reign of the ego would ruin what he had attained. And this reminds me of the humbling of Indra, where once the Indra acknowledges how powerful he is, down he goes within that wheel of samsara to become a row of ants. Kind prince, the subtle body of the universal one is omnipresent, and it is present itself when all speech has been exhausted and the mind has been stripped away. When the highest sincerity is achieved, the subtle cosmic body of the universal one responds. Then, wise prince, the universal one can be seen even in what appears to be plain, simple, and ordinary. Kind of like what Ram Dass said about if you're in a town where you're complaining that there's no spiritual people, well, look a little bit closer, because you've missed the point. Every one of these people, including the most ignorant comments on YouTube, are in fact fractals of this primordial first cause. This next section just straight up gave me diarrhea in a mental way. An intellectual diarrhea. It seems to gracefully summarize the idea of quantum physics and non-locality. The idea that the subatomic particles within us are worlds within us, as we too are its world, and that our entire solar system seems to be also just particles within an unimaginably larger sentient being. Wise prince, the individual body is the cosmic body. The small particle which I referred to before is associated with the individual body. When the world diversifies itself into small particles, it is like the cosmic body appearing as the individual body. Just as the small particles gather, comprising the vast world, the individual actualizes the cosmic body. The cosmic body must not be thought of as something separate from the whole. While the world may not be small particles, it could be traced back to small particles. The cosmic body may be comprehended as the vast and profound universe, but it is not observable in physical terms. It is beyond reach, yet at the same time, it is also within reach. The relationship between the world and the small particles is somewhat similar to the relationship between a flower and a mirror which reflects it. Both reflect each other. Neither can be held as the substance. The relationship between the cosmic body and the individual body is something like the relationship between the moon and its reflection on a lake. One seems to be the real thing and the other is just a reflection. But even the moon is only reflecting the light of the sun. The sun is not the final source either. There is nothing substantial which is final. When the small particles take on some configuration, they may appear solid and fixed. However, they are neither solidly formed nor perpetually changing. It seems true that the world really exists in time and space, but it is merely a transient conjoint event in this place and time. It also seems true that the individual body really exists in time and space, but it too is merely a transient. Even the structure of time and space themselves is not real, but is only a conceptual creation. I mean, maybe theoretical physicists of today should pick up this book and realize that they've got a long way to go. Speaking of that passage, a friend of mine, the drummer of Sidereal, once half-jokingly said to me, I wonder if our entire solar system is just an atom existing within the nutsack of some dude working at Quiznos. And it sounds silly and almost like a stoner thought, right? But if you go to Quiznos and see the guy making sandwiches, you can check his nutsack for yourself and clearly see that it is made out of atoms. But don't do that. Man, how ironic would it be if all these videos I've done railing against the government and exposing CIA documents don't get me demonetized, but that dumbass comment does. I'll get canceled for this video and shot in the head for the others, and it'll be an honor. The text goes on here, taking on the balance of suffering versus pleasure and one's own happiness versus the responsibility to others, dharma, or social duties. Venerable teacher, is an individual responsible for whether his life is pleasant or unpleasant? Is he also responsible for the lives of others? The response of Lao-Tzu goes as such. Kind Prince, after one takes form as an individual entity, suffering and enjoyment continue throughout many lifetimes, and even during the subtle intermission between lives. Oh, look, the bardo. Actually, to suffer and enjoy seems to be the destiny of an individual, but its extent is determined by the way in which one subjectively forms one's energy, consciously and unconsciously. And don't make me break out the Carl Jung charts again. I've been driving those home, but you got it. With regard to whether a person is responsible for the lives of others, it is not a question of responsibility, but of how one manifests one energy. We notice there that he doesn't directly answer the question, which can be perplexing until you study the text, maybe read it a few other times, and by all means, listen to it a few other times and boost my algorithm if you'd like. But in conjunction with the rest of the text, this non-answer to the question almost seems to make more sense than directly answering a question that essentially can't be answered. There are even lyrics within this codex. While I'm uncertain that anyone knows how the melody goes, and if you do, please enlighten me on that, the words are without a doubt some of the most critical I've ever put eyes on. This song that Lao-Tzu supposedly sings, and also this is in reference to those who are in power, what we would call politicians of today. They make moves that disturb the world. The wise and old ones sit still and watch the chess games of the foolish. All the changes in the world are displayed upon the chessboard. This goes to show how old chess is. That's something I would kind of like to look into. Victory and defeat are decided by the subtle elements behind the moves. It can clearly be seen by the wise. The wise remain quiet and watch. The foolish gods only knew it. There is perfect originalness before any moves are made. Reminds me of our pool table example in a few videos back, the Zen and the Inner Flame, which this is kind of a part 2 of, but that pool table analogy. The ones who are not in the chessboard, but the players, thus you holding the cue stick and not being one of the balls, especially one of the balls inside the nutsack of the guy at Quiznos. Once I read this line, I literally had to put the book down and I just sat quietly for about, I'm not sure how much amount of time, but this is thousands of years before Carl Jung was even born. Here we go, and it's a one-line. If a person looks for the path outside himself, he will find his shadow. I just wanted to read it again. If a person looks for the path outside of himself, he will find his own shadow. I mean, obviously, literally, that is the case. But of course, none of this is literal, and that shadow is there if we don't pay attention to what is within us. All right, so here's where we're going to start to get really intense. Check out this section that seems to predict the future. Venerable teacher, will people of the future generations during the age of confusion be able to understand such truth? Response, kind prince, in the future age of confusion, people will create many obstacles to knowing the simple truth and hold fast to their own blindness and falsehoods. They will persuade others to follow them and will persecute unbelievers and even start wars against them. Kind Prince, the one who searches for the truth loses it. The one who wishes to hold the truth causes it to slip away from him. Oh God, it hurts so bad. Because one departs from his own nature to search for something external. He overlooks the truth of his own being. To be is to be true. The muchness and suchness of truth is included in this very second. If you miss the truth of this moment, 1,000 galloping horses cannot catch up with it. I can't help but be reminded of the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The very last line in the movie when he says, life moves pretty quick. If you don't stop and look around every once in a while, you just might miss it. Which that entire movie, by the way, is much like Fight Club, an actual psychological parable. It's not a fun comedy movie. It is that on the surface, but if you ever get a chance, after understanding symbology, watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off knowing that they are the same person, and the movie becomes an entire another trip. Continuing to predict the future here, Venerable Teacher, should this scripture be called the thorough emancipation of the mind, although in truth there is no mind to emancipate, or should it be called the integration of the universal mind? It ended up becoming called the Wu-Wei, but will the general public in the time of confusion be able to benefit from such high instructions? Will it even be powerful enough to lead sensitive individuals out of darkness? And the response, Kind Prince, asked the master, will the people of the future be less intelligent? I'll let you have your answer first. Student's response, Venerable Teacher, replied the prince, I think people of the future will be more intelligent, so I do not understand why there will be more trouble in the future. Although life will be more abundant, people will be more unhappy. Why is this so? Wise Prince, replied the master, it will be from misuse and partial development of intelligence that a time of confusion will arise and grow progressively worse. People will lose their appreciation for a healthy natural life of plainness after being attracted to and entrapped by all kinds of accumulated bad habits. Slavery will pervade human life and all human relationships under different names and reasons. If one is not the slave of social development, he will be the slave of all kinds of emotional entrapment. The forms of slavery are many. Most people become slaves to natural demands, fashionable luxuries, social power, artificial religion or ideology, destiny, and most of all, psychological excuses. And just a quick side note, a lot of denominational religions depict the Buddha and L.o.t.U and these other figures to be false idols when they say clearly in their own texts that they are neither deities or to be worshipped, and in fact say the same thing that fundamental Christians do, not to worship false idols. Yet somehow they're called false idols. That's a perplexity to me of, I think, a bit of ignorance that should be gently corrected, creating unprecedented calamity on a large scale. Kind Prince, the universal way will be available at all times and places for the problems of individuals and the world. It'll be available to you, despite the chaos and the circus. There will be great people who awaken during the era of great confusion and darkness. Through a vast social renaissance, the awakening of the universal divine nature within people will be reached. Its true foundation rests on the people who will achieve themselves through individual emancipation and self-cultivation. This cultivation, of course, being very akin to 2 or 3 videos now endorsing the idea of sacrifice. Self-cultivation seems to be the fine-tuning of oneself at the expense of worldly pleasures and desires and attachments. This next particular passage seems to point us directly to some kind of salvation to our initial question at the beginning of this video. That is, what does darkness have to do with the idea of Buddhahood? The secret of immortal cultivation and the harmonious universe is expressed in the Tai Chi symbol. Everything takes something from something else. The basic structure of the universe that is generally recognized as time and space is not something solid. Time and space can change and dissolve, but the existence of a being or thing does not rely on the framework of time and space. Time and space have no self-nature. They are only accessories of an event. Supernatural beings extend their life force freely to the lives of form and no form, and at the same time keep themselves unformed and supernatural. These two realities can be discussed separately, but both sides belong to the same substance of the Great One universal life. In the process of human evolution, and we have a ancient text that just used the word, I'm not endorsing evolution, but it's in here. In the process of human evolution, the universal truth is reached by one who is whole and who is not entrapped by natural or supernatural phenomenon. And I mean, where's Carl again? And this definitely teeters on that fine line between the action of reading being relaxing and soothing versus it causing you to lose sleep at night. But right here, like a form of everything text, why darkness is as important as light, how to live, and more importantly, why to live. This summarization is so keen that it almost makes me feel like the reason the text is rare is because of how good it is. This text is so damn spot on and poignant and clear that it almost leads the reader to instant liberation, or at least temporary liberation. And we all know that these types of wisdoms, how they're treated in our society today, they get buried. They get buried in this kind of a strip mall style metaphysics, this kind of heaping pile of aesthetic that has to be sifted through in order to find this diamond in the rough. The last portion I'll read here. The integral cultivation of the immortal achievement must be built on a firm foundation of virtue. The opportunity to learn and practice such cultivation is heaven's reward to those who are truly virtuous. This means not to be virtuous by helping a fish from drowning by putting him in a tree, but to actually cultivate humility and within kind action, such as planting a tree for future generations. All human beings are the descendants of the original spiritual inhabitants of this world many, many eons ago. Let me read that one more time. All human beings are the descendants of the original spiritual inhabitants of this world many, many eons ago, or ions for you fans of Jung. But people have deviated from the accurate awareness of the divine nature of life and have lost the qualities of these angelic beings. Is this Atlantis? Is this pre-Atlantis? Is this something that we can't, is it an allegory? Like, it goes on. Only those who have restored the angelic qualities of their being and who have already actualized the universal way may be instructed in the method used by the angels to enhance and integrate their energy in order to become immortal divine beings. This might remind us of the mysteries of Eleusis. Oh, you all remember Plato going off to the spot. The final paragraph in this section. For such teachers reside in the subtle divine realm or in seclusion where they have an ordinary appearance and lead an ordinary life. And this, of course, in our last video on Zen, reminds me of the final step of riding the ox home, which is returning to the marketplace. Unadorned, dirty, with tattered rags as a garment, yet just showing up into the marketplace, old withered trees come into bloom. It's a vibe. It's fearlessness, it's certainty, and it's heart chakra. That heart chakra existing between the subtle realms and the lower chakras. That middle point where the Buddha was born in the first place and where Adam gave birth to Eve. I could go on and on this particular book, but I don't want to end up just straight up reading to you like it's a bedtime story. Although it would be my pleasure to do so though. I'll tuck you in, baby birds. and encourage you to get a copy of this book, the Wu-Wei. And once again, would like to remind you that this is not a paid endorsement. I simply would like you, the viewer, to get the best of the best when it comes to these teachings, sifting through of all this strip mall style fluff. And with dirty hands, come up and bring you to the surface these almost hidden pieces of wisdom. Still remains within this ancient text the answer to the question that we had in the original portion of this video. The reason that darkness is an essential part of Zen in the first place, a teaching that just will not fit into our human language. So we have no other choice but to look at it with our eyes. Or if you were to ask the Buddha to do so, we would have to look at it with our eye. And despite being overused and watered down, quite frankly, this symbol is that which represents the answer to that huge question. Here it is, plain as day. I'm gonna put a symbol up. I'm not pointing to my computer. Here it is, the symbol. There'll be something on the screen there. To end this video, I feel like the most suitable thing to do would be to summarize this non-thing called Zen the best way I can. So, to put it simply, Zen is actually a form of... I'd like to share 3 simple but difficult steps to see outside our biological limitations and behavioral programming. These steps will not make any sense without a little bit of groundwork being covered. Anyone familiar with this channel knows that this is not an attempt to make you stay till the end. The information prior to these steps is important, as we know that jumping into deep waters is far less jarring when prepared. So right off the bat, I would like to say a couple things that will either make you change the channel altogether or more eager to climb down this rabbit hole with me. The reality we perceive is a fractal of a more complex infinite reality. Think of the shadow of a cube. It's a square or a hexagram. We don't see the cube, but instead we see the shadow, and that is the reality in which we live. So a long ass time ago, but also kind of yesterday, human beings were created as capsules that are meant to act as little schools. I'm not Joe Phipps any more than you are Tyler Joseph or whatever your name is. The entity who is really us is something that we cannot imagine with our mammalian brain. This prison is often referred to as the black cube for metaphorical purposes. This cosmic entity that is the self with a capital S decides to teach itself about something and needs to learn directly, not spoken of or read about, but experienced firsthand. We call this gnosis. We enter the black cube to encounter suffering, as this is the fastest way to grow. No mud, no lotus. Although sometimes we regret it. When the self enters the black cube, it is not one body or even 2, but very many different bodies in different timelines even. If you have ever met someone that you just instantly click with, or someone that you just and hate with all your guts, this very well could be a fractal of you emanating from the self. This formless entity we call the self remembers all things experienced within the black cube in order to bring this information back to the halls of a mentee, or the absolute or unified field, whatever you want to call it depending on your culture. This information is then studied and clarified. This higher self retains memory in timeless space, and our animal bodies tend to pick up on that memory. And when we pick up that frequency, it will cause a phenomenon called deja vu. Like radio waves that are picked up by changing the station, our mind can also change frequencies to pick up bigger portions of reality. There are those who can pick up this frequency naturally without any kind of help. In today's society, we call them mentally ill. In the world of yesterday, they were called mystics and shamans. An Oriental proverb states that freedom does not exist. Instead, only the act of freeing ourselves. But what are we freeing ourselves from? What steps can we take to become liberated like those that are born with this divine gift? The word shaman loosely translates to one who knows deeper origins. How can a shaman or a mystic have access to billions of years of information
information. Well, there is only one thing that's been around for that long, and it's called DNA. So in today's society, we treat symptoms, but are deathly afraid of the cure. In psychology, we medicate or talk to a guy with a clipboard because we're afraid to get to the core of who we are. As Jung states, that is about the most frightening thing a person can do. And in medicine, we treat symptoms instead of curing diseases. We seem to be deathly afraid to face those that are withholding the cures, or afraid to be scrutinized by our peers for simply understanding that many times over, brilliant men and women have indeed figured out various cures to ailments like cancer and AIDS. Getting to the seed of these problems means digging through the mud and shit that it grows in. So we oftentimes just choose comfort. All shamanic practices speak of a secret language that they encounter Gnostically, a language that is also said to be a ladder that connects heaven and earth. This ladder or spiraling staircase, it's kind of an ascension into a higher world, and that symbolism has been adopted by the Freemasons, as you can see with their staircase of 3, 5, and 7. In addition to ladders, the shamans also speak of twin serpents the world over. In fact, the word Quetzalcoatl can be translated to mean magnificent twin. It takes both to create life. This makes me wonder if the concept is the origin of dual thinking that has been transcended by the Zen masters and philosophers like Carl Jung. Twin serpents and spiraling ladders, of course, was symbolic for what we know now as DNA, as proposed quite convincingly by Jeremy Narby. Over 97% of our DNA is considered junk DNA. The reason we call it this is simply because it doesn't create code for making proteins. I can't help but think of how short-sighted this is, considering that nature is not likely to create anything extra or unnecessary for survival. Knowing damn well that DNA sequences are indeed a form of language, this tells me that there must be some kind of message encoded within this so-called junk DNA. A widespread axiom ponders the idea of God hiding the deepest meaning of the universe from man in order for it to only be attained by those who are worthy. The allegory goes that he reflected upon hiding it on the moon. Then one day humans could get there and it might be the wrong humans to find it. Then he considered hiding it in the depths of the ocean, but just like the moon, it might be found by those who are corrupt. He then concluded that he would put his secrets within the inner sanctum of man's own being. Then only those who truly deserve will be able to understand. Mystics the world over in different ways have claimed that burning within their abdomens, a twin serpent energy would rise up through the spine and explode in their heads, propelling them into what is called, quote, the other world. Although called many things, it's most familiar to us as resembling Kundalini. Modern science rails firmly against shamanic practices and mystic rituals such as trances and usage of hallucinogens, and at the same time praises modern academics like Francis Crick, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the construct of what DNA is. But so ironically, it's an absolute fact that Francis Crick was blasted out of his mind on hallucinogens when he had his epiphanous discovery of DNA. Plant drugs, or as we should call them, plant teachers, have been utilized to connect man to his DNA for thousands of years. In fact, if you break down the word entheogens, we can see that the suffix theo, meaning God, and the prefix en, meaning within, points in the direction of meaning
God within. It's so pleasantly ironic that this word that we demonize literally means to awaken God within. Hallucinogens show us the limitations of science. Plant teachers teach us more than we can teach ourselves, as they have been here the entire time that we have. The question arises, are the beings in these hallucinations real? Well, let's consider the fact that the eye does not see. It's only a lens. An eyeball is a lens. The seeing that takes place happens in the back of the brain anatomy in a section called the occipital. Okay, Google, how do I pronounce occipital lobe?
Here are some details.
Just say it.
Occipital lobe.
Thank you. A section that we call the occipital lobe, and we still don't know how it works, but the mystics did. When a person experiences vivid hallucinations after changing the channel of their DNA frequency, the images they see are not caused by external stimuli, therefore, in a way, making it more real than anything ever seen by the eye, which can be tricked. When a teaching is experienced, the word real goes out the window. Whenever we use the word real, we accidentally tend to mean physical matter, which doesn't actually matter at all. In all shamanic cultures, the archetype stands that non-material beings not only interact with, but actually maintain and form our reality. This, of course, reminds us of the concept of the higher self and the physical body as an etheric schooling system. Very common in psychedelic experiences, even that of ayahuasca of the Peruvians, the participants encounter what we call today as the Greys. If you guys haven't checked out yet, Supernatural by Graham Hancock, I cannot recommend this book enough. There's a section in here where, this went down to the jungle and did this shit for himself. He does his hands-on research, unlike a lot of the scientists of today that kind of cower behind their desks. In his notes, what's that look like to you? So this raises a lot of questions. Besides that, and he's not the only one. If you look at some of these pieces of artwork, and I'll put the actual artwork up on the screen to be seen more clearly in color, but there's parallels to be made here. I want to read a short section from Graham's notes here, if I can find it. Graham wrote in his notes the next day, "They seem to have business with me. They want to communicate. The communication or attempt feels telepathic, but somehow it's not getting through. I sense eagerness and frustration on their part. And anyone who has dabbled in hallucinogens that have encountered these creatures knows that they're eager to teach us something that we can't seem to grasp. We're mammals. It's like trying to teach an ant calculus. It doesn't work, but they're attempting to." There are multiple parallels between shamanic practices and alien abduction experiences, indicate an idea that those from the quote other world are trying to help us and guide humanity. And so after a night of ayahuasca, a good thorough session, Graham Hancock sketched and wrote in his notebook. A portion of it. Yeah, I know you guys are telling me to reset the timer on my fucking screen. I haven't got around to it yet. He wrote in his notebook, "Spirit and matter, as above, so below. Science teaches us to believe that the material world is the primary and only reality. But from the ayahuasca perspective, this is absolutely not the case. What we call material world is only a part of the pattern." End quote. A quick side note, speaking of Graham Hancock's masterpiece, Supernatural, which is now called Visionary, by the way. The world over, cave paintings show human hybrids, human bodies with animal heads. This is not limited to cave paintings either, as we've seen Egyptian hieroglyphs. This archetype is so mysterious. I have been dabbling in it for, years now, and I still haven't figured it out. But it is worth mentioning here, considering the topic of today being shamans and mystics and shit. Many cultures describe beings that come from the other world and into our own through the art of shape-shifting. These masters of transformation are said to often take on the form of reptiles. But when the changing of form takes place, it is described as looking like a kaleidoscope. And what's that remind us of? cave paintings in the back of caves that are meant to, be safe from weathering. This is not for the sake of art, but for the sake of sending a message to generations later. In the image I'll show right here, we can see that it's an overlapping image on top of another image, which to the viewer seems nonsensical. But we can tell it's not meant to be art. If it was meant to be art, each image would be segregated. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at something that is meant to tell us something. And I'll put it up on the screen here. A personal experience of mine has a very similar aspect to it. That seems to be an egregore of consciousness, kind of a library of sentience that has become one entity. Plants don't communicate like human beings. They don't communicate in the form of abstract symbols, words, and pictures, but they sure as do communicate. It's worth noting that other species of human like Neanderthal didn't utilize symbols or language, and this emerged strictly with Homo erectus. Homo erectus. I worked it in there. Something I'm gonna have to check my notes on real quick. Let me check my notes on it real quick. Oh man. Yeah, these notes are great. I'm so fortunate to have this great notebook to put my notes in. Buy this. Plants don't have eyes like we do, but they have photoreceptors along their entire mitochondria, just like the anatomy of the human eye. This is called plastogloobuli. Plastogloobuli. I've had just about enough of all this Apple talk. Comment from the peanut gallery about having what kind of phone do I have? I have a regular phone, which is not a Apple phone. So I guess life is just harder for me. All right, so for pronunciation's sake, right now we're saying plastogloobuli. Globuli. Pronounce it how it's a mouth noise. You get it. So if you want to get weird with mouth noises for it, there you go. But you understand, plants can see. No matter how you phrase it, plants can see color and hear sound. And you can bet your ass they communicate with each other. And as long as we learn to pay attention, they communicate with us. Good example that I'm just now realizing, Jeremy Narby, when I read this, it fucked my brain up. So I'm gonna read it to you. He had been having back pain, and he was complaining about it to these the Peruvians, where they gave him a concoction made from plants. He warned me that I would feel cold, that my body would seem rubbery for 2 days, and that I would see some images. I was skeptical, thinking that if it were really possible to cure chronic back pain with vegetal tea, Western medicine would surely know about it. You guys kind of see where this is going. On the other hand, I thought it was worth trying because it could not be less effective than the cortisone injections. That's what he had been using as a treatment. I drank the Sanango tea. After 20 minutes, a wave of cold submerged me. I felt chilled to the bone. I broke out into a profuse cold sweat and had to wring out my sweatshirt several times. Oh, he's wearing a sweatshirt. This is the jungle. That doesn't make any... After 6 rather difficult hours, the cold feeling went away, but I no longer controlled the coordination of my body. I could not walk without falling down. For 5 minutes, I saw an enormous column of multicolored lights across the sky. These were my only hallucinations. The lack of coordination lasted 48 hours. On the morning of the 3rd day, my back pain had disappeared. It has not returned. I tend not to believe this kind of story unless I have lived it myself. And neither would I, but I'm gonna go ahead and take Narby's word for it because this book is brilliant. Like suggested by the Beatles, it is a cornerstone in Zen to own nothing. I feel like this could be for a bigger reason than just humility and lack of material goods. If we have nothing such as desire and possessions to protect, it makes us not susceptible to being fed upon by the archons of the Gnostic demiurge. Yeah, there's gonna be like a lot of you who didn't understand that. That's okay. If you do, thanks for watching. Neem Karoli Baba, who was the guru of spiritual teacher Ram Dass. He was never seen giving lectures, offering courses, or even taking donations, although he performed loving, humilitous miracles on a regular basis. His religion was kindness and love. When asked how to help the world, he would say very simple things like, feed people. Known as Maharaji, would go into a state of samadhi, where he would do charitable work on multiple planes of existence. To those who were worthy or fortunate enough, he could induce the state of samadhi just by peering at a person. Everything that the Baba did was from a place of love, which is by all means cemented his message in stone, especially through the spiritual teachings of Ram Dass. And on a much darker end of that same spectrum, ironically, would be a man who I consider to be a philosopher, but also by definition a mystic, just like the Shamans and Maharaji. But every video I've seen on Carl, they always seem to introduce him as Swiss psychologist or analyst, blah, blah, blah. I, however, will be referring to Carl as a philosopher and a mystic because that's what he was and still is to me. I'm going to be honest with you. To this day, I have not finished the Red Book. I always end up putting it down in order to grow a bit more, and then I'll attempt to take another bite out of it after I've evolved a bit intellectually. The problem used to be not understanding it, but now, ironically, the problem is that sometimes I accidentally do understand it, and it really frightens me down to my core. And I'm here to tell you right now that if you breeze through Carl Jung's Red Book without having an existential crisis, you haven't understood it. The universe, so to speak, seemed to force against his will a form of understanding that would redirect the rest of his life. This dark period in Carl's career can be compared to our video concerning the dark night of the soul. He experienced visions, premonitions, and otherworldly concepts that could be translated into words only loosely. It was from this dark and confusing period of Carl's life that we now have terms like synchronicity, introvert and extrovert, the shadow archetype, and a myriad of other notions that can be used as tools in self-completion today. Friedrich Nietzsche, years before, like Carl, dove into the darkest depths of his own mind for the sake of his life's work and the betterment of humanity. Knowing damn well what happened to Fred, Carl did the same, but was able to survive it. You might remember a series of books called Magic Eye, if you're a 90s kid especially. These books had 3D illusions built into each picture that were made of patterns. There's at least a few of you right now exploding with excitement, not having any idea where this is going, but yeah, those books were cool. If you can't see the illusions within these patterns, it's probably because you have an iPhone. I'm going to edit that out. Each page had 2 images, one of which could not be seen until the viewer defocused his eyes and relaxed enough to let the vision come to him. For right now, let's call that action defocalization. This is an absolute perfect metaphor for how we can see through the black cube of our limitations. Anyone who studies hard, difficult subjects, or practices a trade, or commits to learning a musical instrument and so on, has probably noticed that the old adage is true: practice makes perfect. But practice is not where ideas and breakthroughs come from. We know that going for a walk or staring into the night sky or any other form of break from study and practice is where truly groundbreaking ideas seem to emerge. When we corner ourselves to perfecting a craft or learning a subject, we oftentimes just run in circles to grasp something that is just right outside of our reach. It's only when we pull away from that intense study that epiphanies seem to arise as a result of the duality between hyper-focused practice and taking a breather. To put it bluntly, ideas pop up when we don't focus on our work. When attempting to transcend the limitations of the black cube, I have noticed in my experience that there are 3 cornerstone steps involved. The first of which is sobriety. I'm going to be a hypocrite here, but let's just keep moving here. Sobriety allows us to become in touch with both our psychological nature in a raw format, as well as cuts off any blockages from the information that we can gain from our DNA, which we've learned is alive and speaks. I know it sucks to hear, but even today's neuroscientists have found that substances like alcohol and marijuana will reduce the amount of dreamless sleep that is required for the brain to rejuvenate. Fewer amount of you might know that entheogens like DMT will not work with people who are on SSRIs or antidepressants. Without diving into a conspiracy here, it's worth noting that it almost seems like pharmaceuticals are designed to block us from these messages encoded in our DNA, thus blocking us from our own divine nature. A disclaimer here, I'm absolutely not saying to stop taking medications or that marijuana should be ceased. In fact, in many cases, cannabis, like in the case of edibles, can lead to certain forms of gnosis, but these are temporary. I think that the key here should be the word moderation, just like the second and third step that we're about to delve into. All right, hold on a second. I gotta refill this fucking badass cup with Monster energy drink. Again, really nice cup to have. Okay, shut up. The second step is shamanic practice and mystic ritual, or deep esoteric study, so to speak. This is a broad step in a wide-ranging spectrum of activity. It really means what suits you best. This could be through meditation and yoga, breathing exercises, kriya, or just reading and studying abstract ideas that expand your mind, or even religious and spiritual practices. In any case, though, the key is to go in hard and completely submerge yourself in whatever it is that you are attempting to attain or shed. The key here is isolation. When practicing these activities or studying these abstract subjects, you are best without distractions from outside stimulus. A person oftentimes is quick to run and tell their friends and family about what they've learned and what they've been up to, but we should refrain from that for the sake of cerebral hygiene. Just like the magic eye patterns, this will not bring us to gnosis alone, no matter how deep we focus on the subject at hand, which brings us to our third step. What we just referred to as defocalization means to break away from the second step completely. Hang out with kids, converse with friends and family about everyday normal life, and celebrate the little joys of being alive, like going for a walk or eating a crumpet or something. Instead of sharing everything that you've learned, simply share yourself with others. Basically, relax from the second step and do the opposite of it. This, like Carl suggested, causes the tension of the poles to unify. And just like relaxing your eyes when looking at the patterns of an optical illusion, a new image will appear to the spectator. All right, if I get one more comment about my screen going blue, I'm gonna kick you off the platform. I'm not going to. I need subscribers. I'm broke. So a new image will appear to the spectator that will oftentimes surprise them. Something that we did not expect to see or learn will emerge from the seed of that second step, just like some kind of a dolphin will emerge from the scattered nonsense in one of these optical illusions. To recap, DNA speaks. We can speak directly to our DNA through plants or practice of meditation and other activities. And then, of course, defocalization. It probably goes without saying that diet and exercise is not going to hurt this process whatsoever. If you would like to learn more detailed, credible resources on connecting these dots, I know I've plugged it 100 times, but Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby, Graham Hancock's Supernatural, known as Visionary now. But I don't want to go without mentioning Joseph Campbell.
I am a Joseph Campbell addict as well as an addict of anything that comes in sets. So these 3 books in particular attack the ideas of mythology in their raw format and what they're meant to teach us. But when you compare these mythologies to particular ideals of science today, there are connections to be made here. The mystics and shamans of yesterday understood the universe in a way that we don't. And as long as we stay pigeonholed to this scientific jargon of skepticism and slitting our throats on Occam's razor, there's a good chance that we never will. It's, again, like Carl suggested, to unify the opposites that will be the cornerstone of gnosis here. In order to understand ourselves and the world around us, we cannot stick one-sidedly to one aspect and ideal to another. It is important that we take what we've learned from mythology and what potential science has and unify those opposites in order to come to clearer and more concise conclusions. You can't have one without the other. Science speaks to the mind, philosophy and mythology speaks to the heart.
Transmutation.
The words Christ and Buddha are both titles, kind of like the word king or plaintiff, whereas Jesus and Siddartha are names. Jesus, or Yeshua, is the name of the Christ, the Messiah, and Siddartha is the first of many to be called a Buddha. Of course, there are obvious differences between these two characters. The main diff being that Siddartha the Buddha did not believe himself to be divine, but instead the same as us, as anyone can become a Buddha. To be a Christ, however, much like the Highlander, there can only be one, because Jesus taught that his words were directly from Big Guns upstairs, teachings from the will of God direct. However, the Buddha was more like Socrates in his approach, that is, to question everything, even his own teachings, if they, quote, don't line up with your core truth. That being said, let's play a fun little game today. So go get the kids in a bowl of chili and see how we do. I'm going to say a couple of phrases and I want you to guess which one of these kind gentlemen said it. First one. The avaricious do not go to heaven. The foolish do not extol charity. The wise one, however, rejoicing in charity, becomes thereby happy in the beyond. If you guessed the Buddha, congrats. But if this phrase sounds familiar, you are not alone, as old JC said the same thing down to a T with, quote, if you wish to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. So, okay, round two. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one also. Okay, fine, that is an easy one. But again, we have something exactly parallel spoken by the Buddha when he said, if anyone should give you a blow with his hand, you should abandon any desires and utter no evil words. Let's kick out another one here. Quote, consider others as yourself. Now, this could have easily come from the mouth of Jesus, who spoke, do to others as you would have them do unto you. But it was in fact spoken by the OG Buddha that we call Siddartha. So last one, but this time let's break away from the direct quotes and read about a little background. You guess which one this describes. While he practiced, the demon followed behind him, step by step, seeking an opportunity to harm him. But he found no opportunity and went away discouraged. And on this, if you guessed the Buddha, well, indeed, this verse is found in the Lalitavastara Sutra 18. Let me try that again real quick. All right, it's from the sutras, that's the Buddha. But you already know where this is going, because the book of Luke 4:13 states, when the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. So the differences in these fellas are obvious when it comes to details, and I mean objective details like time and place of birth and how they taught others. We know that Jesus spread the word as a mission, whereas almost opposite of that, Siddartha sat quietly and waited for others to seek him. But the differences pretty much end right there, because the content of their teachings and trials are so similar that one might even wonder how these gents are separated by over 500 years and hundreds of miles. Had they met, they'd surely be fast friends. Despite the similarities found in the main canonical Bible, there is a very controversial book that just downright sounds Buddhist. And although it seems to have been written years after the main canon, the Gospel of Thomas has sparks of wisdom flying off of it that are worth taking a look at, even with a skeptical eye. When Siddartha said, the faults of others are easier to see than one's own, we can surely recognize how true that is. Jesus took a more parabolic approach to this teaching, however, using metaphors. He said, why do you see the splinter in someone else's eye and never notice the log in your own? Oof. It's brutal. And for those of you who might find spirituality to be kind of lame, Jesus had some sick one-liners, and I'm not using ironic language right now. So
I am almost sure that upon seeing the title of this video, there were two different kinds of knee-jerk reaction. Those who see parallels and those who see differences. To those who see the differences, I would like to let you know personally that I am in no way speaking as if Jesus was not the Messiah. In fact, I think that this helps the case. The main problem that Orthodox Christians will have with this video is the idea of false idols or multiple gods. I respect this concern, but also find it necessary to point out that a Buddha is not a claim of divine being, but instead a regular person who has merely realized the divinity of being. It has occurred to me that Buddhism is a practice and not a religion. The same as someone who might practice karate or pole vaulting. Those people can be Christians. There are several people who are devout Christians who practice Buddhism. That is to say, self-discipline and analysis of the worlds within. So really, it would be helpful to take the ism off of the word, but that is just not within my pay grade. Practicing Buddhism is more akin to practicing the piano than it is a worship of any kind. But none of this will help me ignore the parallels between the two teachings. The Orthodox and authoritative Church has a long habit of hiding sacred manuscripts and books from the public eye. The Vatican has a gigantic vault, and we cannot see it, of which the canonical Bible is only a drop in the ocean compared to. There are many theories as to why these books are hidden. But long ago, there was no separation of church and state. The church was the law-making authority. So you can imagine that the will of man oftentimes got in the way of the will of God. It is almost certain that there have been changes made to the Bible in order to preserve a system of control of some kind. If there are manuscripts that teach us that we don't need a church to have divine communion with a higher power, you can bet your ass that those are going to be thrown out. In fact, no one has burned and destroyed more books than the authoritative church. And the books that were burned have a common theme. But before we get back to that, many of you are familiar with an early Christian sect called the Gnostics. These Gnostics went out of their way to preserve and protect many of these manuscripts from being destroyed. They would make copies of these manuscripts and then hide them to later be found, like a message in a bottle, or more specifically, a message in a vase. Vase? Vase? Is it vase? I don't know. This seems to be what happened when the Gospel of Thomas was found in Nag Hammadi. Let's read some of this and see how it holds up compared to canon as well as the sutras. And spoiler alert, there are some sections that are also downright Jungian. Speaking of that, right off the bat, we have Jesus said, "Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. When they find, they will be disturbed. When they are disturbed, they will marvel and will reign over all." And this reminds me of what Jung said about, man will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing his own inner subconscious. Jesus said, "If those who guide you say, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds are closer than you are. If they say, 'Look, it is in the sea,' then the fish already know it. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you." And I mean, this has got Taoism written all over it. When you know yourself, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the child of the living Father. But if you don't know yourself, you will live in vain and be in vanity. Now, this has similarities not only to Buddhism, but also to Luke 17:20-21. Once Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming, and he answered, "The kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'there it is.' In fact, the kingdom of God is among you." It's already here. This is perspective. Within the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, "Recognize what is in front of you, and what is hidden from you will be revealed. There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed." His disciples questioned him, "Should we fast? How should we pray? How should we give alms? What rules should we follow?" And again, Jesus repeated, "What is in front of the listener's face is Jesus." Within Thomas, the disciples asked Jesus, "Tell us what will be our end." Jesus answered, "What do you know of the beginning, so that you now seek the end? Where the beginning is, the end will also be. Blessed are those who abide in the beginning, for they will know the end and will not taste death." And this seems to be very akin to Revelation 22:13. What's up, buddy? Well, it's like, yeah.
You know Pokemon?
Yes, I do. Pokemon Burns. Brutal.
Your sense of direction so bad you can't find yourself in a mirror.
Oh my gosh.
Most of us can hallucinate at a time.
That's almost a bit synchronistic, considering some of the zingers that Jesus presented in the Gospel of Thomas. It was a funny synchronicity, but let's get back to this gospel here. Oh, Pokemon. The last thing we read ties to Revelation 22:13 about him being the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, saying that they are, in fact, the same. The parable of the mustard seed, many people are familiar with. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us what heaven's kingdom is like." He said to them, "It's like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, but when it falls on prepared soil, it produces a large plant and becomes a shelter for birds in the sky." And I mean, although that is metaphorical, we can clearly see what he means by prepared soil being a heart which is at ease with righteousness. And again, this is parallel to several books such as Mark and Luke, making the two into one. Jesus saw some infants being nursed at the breast. He said to his disciples, "These nursing infants are like those who enter the kingdom." The disciples asked him, "Then shall we become as infants to enter the kingdom?" Jesus answered them, "When you make the two into one, when you make the inner like the outer and the high like the low, when you make the male and the female into a single one, when you have eyes in your eyes, a hand in your hand, a foot in your foot, and an icon in your icon, you will enter into the kingdom." And this seems to be parallel to non-duality thinking practiced by both Buddhists and Taoists, not to mention the unification of opposites that is popularized by Dr. Jung. His disciple said, "Show us the place where you are, for we must seek it." He said to him, "Anyone here with 2 ears had better listen." Damn. "There is a light within a person of light, and it shines on the whole world. If it does not shine, it is dark." This is claiming that heaven is within the person's realization of themselves. Jesus said, "If you do not fast from the world, you will not find the kingdom. If you do not celebrate the Sabbath, you will not know the Father." And this, I feel like, is kind of attuned to meditation. That would be kind of fasting the mind from stimulation. Jesus said, "If flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of flesh, it is a wonder of wonders. Yet the greatest of wonders is this: how is it that this being, which inhabits this nothingness?" And that's definitely, I feel like it's got a bit of almost a quantum type of feel to it, considering that we are just now starting to speculate that mind seems to come before material matter and not the opposite, as we've been taught in school. They say that the mind seems to be something that the brain does, which is incorrect, it seems, according to modern science and to old JC here. What else we got? When a blind person leads another blind person, they will fall into a pit. Well, that could be definitely taken literally as well as figuratively, couldn't it? But I'm sure that seems to be about false prophets. His disciples asked him, "When will be the day that you appear to us? When will be the day of our vision?" Jesus replied, "On the day when you are naked as newborn infants who trample on their clothing, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will have no more fear." So obviously he didn't give them a date or a time or a place. Again, he is giving them an example that would only come from within at any time. This seems to indicate that selflessness is a core element of Christianity, and of course, it is of Buddhism as well. Jesus said the Pharisees are basically the orthodox, the church of authority, those who disregard any kind of new ideas. "The Pharisees and the scribes have received the keys of knowledge and hidden them." Ooh. "They did not go within, and those who wanted to go there will be prevented by them. As for you, be as alert as serpents and as simple as the dove." Despite this, this book of Thomas being controversial, each one of these has a canonical parallel. For example, in Matthew 23:13, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the kingdom of heaven before men. You do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow entrance to those trying to enter. So he called it. One might say that the Gospel of Thomas is a false document, and that is a respectable argument. But you can't ignore that it's parallel to many canonical biblical scriptures that have just been twisted and bent just a little bitty bit. Whoever has something in hand, more will be given. Whoever has nothing, even the little they have will be taken away. I used to think that this was about worldly goods, those born into prosperity and rich families and whatnot, who honestly have something and are given more because of their ample opportunities, versus people who are born poor, thus receive less opportunities, thus losing the little that they have. But upon reading this in context with the rest of the Gnostic Gospels, it almost seems as if what he means is that divine light within us. If you have little, you'll have none, whereas if you have some, it will be amplified. And I love this one, 42, 2 words, be passersby. And this obviously, I wouldn't say obviously, but seems to indicate the idea of not clinging to anything and not having attachment, like a particular place to live or particular people to be around all the time, to be free of locking yourself into desire and attachment. Basically, don't be afraid to leave it all behind. Jesus said, if two make peace with each other in a single house, then they can say to the mountain, move, and it will move. This kind of almost seems like the benefits of teamwork, so to speak. But there might be a deeper parallel involved there that I'm not catching. If you get anything out of these that I am not, feel free to comment. 51, his disciples asked him, when will the dead be at rest? When will the new world come? Again, they seem to be asking for a date and time. He answered them, what you are waiting for has already come, but you do not see it. Introspection. Jesus said, whoever cannot free themselves from their father and their mother cannot become my disciple. Whoever cannot free themselves from their brother and sister and does not bear their cross as I do is not worthy of me. This obviously seems to reflect renunciation of attachment and not literally abandoning your family, so to speak. It's a lot of these things are admittedly exaggerated in order to drive home some metaphorical parable, as Jesus often seemed to do in both the canonical scriptures as well as the Gnostic Gospels as well. This is going to be one of everyone's favorites. 58, Jesus said, blessed are those who have undergone ordeals. They have entered the life. This seems to tell us that the more toils and suffering that we go through and still, yet like Job, still remain faithful with the inner light within us is a rewarding process, and those will be loved just as much, if not more, once that unity within has been found. 59, Jesus said, look to the living one while you are alive. If you wait until you are dead, you will search in vain for the vision. And this is very parallel to John 7:34 when he says, you will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. And then from John 13:33, little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. The whole crew saw a Samaritan carrying a lamb into Judea, and then Jesus said to his disciples, what will the man do with the lamb? They answered, he will kill and eat it. He told them, as long as it is alive, he will not eat it, but only if he kills it and it becomes a cadaver. They said, of course, he can't do otherwise. So Jesus said to them, seek a place in repose. Do not become like cadavers, lest you be eaten. Now, I almost don't want to bring up the other part of Gnosticism for this concerning the Apocrypha of John and what we've learned about archons, but it does kind of remind me of that. And all right, this one's got just the Buddha written all over it. Jesus said, that is why I say that when disciples are open, they are filled with light. When they are divided, they are filled with darkness. And of course, within the Taoist scriptures and Buddhist scriptures, we have the metaphor of becoming an empty cup so that you are now able to receive some higher, subtle energies. Jesus said, I reveal my mysteries to those who become worthy. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Of course, this phrase is all over the internet. I really don't have any reason to cover it here. You've already seen it. 63, Jesus said, there was once a rich man with a great mountain of money who said, I will use my money for sowing, reaping, planting, and filling my silos with grain so that I will never lack anything. Such was the thought of his heart. Yet that night he died. Those who have ears, let them hear. I feel like that whole scenario should have been in that Alanis Morissette song. Isn't it ironic? He saved up for everything he would ever need and died the next day. That particular parable he speaks is exactly the same as in Luke 12:16 of the canonical. I love this one, 66, when Jesus said, show me the stone rejected by the builders. That is the cornerstone. Of course, the cornerstone in Masonic rites is the first stone to be set for a building. This seems to be an embracing of the rejected and the fallen, which is, of course, something that, again, the two gentlemen have in common. 67, Jesus said, those who know the all yet do not know themselves are deprived of everything. Some straight Buddha shit. Now, the author of this particular book, which is, this book is by History Academy, so it doesn't have one particular author, it seems, but they added their own 2 cents to that. They quote, what good is it to own the entire universe and lose your soul? To move from heresy to realization is to pass from worlds and belief to wholeness in action, to make the outer and the inner as one. That's some Jung shit. 68, Jesus said, blessed are you when they hate and persecute you. There is a place where you are not persecuted that they will never find. And I'm thinking of some conspiracy theorists out there who might need to hear that one. 70, Jesus said, when you bring forth what is within you, then that will save you. If you do not, then that will kill you. Oh man, am I reminded of Jung, who said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll control your life and you'll call it fate. This is almost the two men saying the same thing. In Matthew 5:1-12, Jesus does not demand actual poverty. Poverty in spirit, this is a matter of not desiring wealth rather than not having wealth. 76, he says, the kingdom of the Father is like the merchant who had a load of goods to sell. Then he saw a pearl. The merchant was wise and sold his goods to buy the pearl. You too should pursue that treasure which is everlasting, there where moths never go, nor do worms devour. And this pearl seems to remind me of the Philosopher's Stone within the lore of alchemy. This is interesting. 83. When images become visible to people, the light that is in them is hidden. In the icon of the light of the Father, it will be manifest, and the icon veiled by the light. This reminds me a lot of what Donald Hoffman has been doing lately scientifically with explaining how we don't necessarily see the objective world the way that it is, but instead it is filtered through this process of mind and brain and senses and nervous system in order to capture it in a way that we can understand it to better survive within the material world. We are this eternal idea within God's mind, similar to how we view being the dream of the Brahma. 89, Jesus said, why do you wash the outside of the cup? Do you not understand that the one who made the outside and made the inside? So I'm guessing that means Jesus didn't like doing dishes. I mean, if you're the Messiah, you really ain't got time for all that. So he kind of half-assed the dishes. Maybe he's one of those guys who really maybe just does a bad job on the dishes when he's asked. That way he's never asked again, you know? I'm kidding. All right, that parable obviously means we need to cleanse what's going on inside of us before we worry about what our appearance is like on the outside. 91, you search the face of heaven and earth, but you do not recognize the one who is in your presence, and you do not know how to experience the present moment. This reminds me a lot of what Alan Watts and Eckhart Tolle has taught us. 94, whoever seeks will find, whoever knocks from inside, it will open to them. That's reassuring. Find some more of my favorites here on. At 99, his disciples said to him, your brothers and your mother are waiting outside. He replied, those who do my Father's will are my brothers and my mother. I suppose they are there to pick him up or whatever, to go to the movies, and they were waiting on him, but he was out there, slinging these one-liners and having them held up there. But, and obviously we know that that's not quite quite what this means, because this seems to indicate that there's equality between family surpassing that of blood relation. Wretched are the Pharisees. They are like the dog lying in a cow's manger. He cannot eat and will not let the cows eat. We kind of see where he's going with that, considering what we know about the Pharisees a minute ago. So the 103, blessed are they who know at what time of night the thieves will come. They will be awake, gathering their strength and strapping on their belts before the thieves arrive. Now, this can be confusing if taken literally, but it seems to me to indicate to know your own faults. To know when the thieves will strike means to understand your own temptations and desires enough, to understand yourself enough to be prepared for that battle within that is sure to happen when meeting temptation. 106, when you make the two into one, you will be a son of man, and you will say, mountain move, and it will move. This is again referring to doing something impossible by doing something simple. And making the two into one used to make me think of the hemisync, a synchronization between the left and right hemispheres that seems to cause a form of clairvoyance, but that is merely speculation on my end. In 107, Jesus said, the kingdom is like the shepherd with 100 sheep. One of them disappeared. It was the most beautiful. The shepherd left the other 99 sheep to look for only that one until he found it. After his great effort, he said to the lamb, I love you more than the other 99. Rude, but it's rude until we know what he means by that. Many of us will stray from the righteous path, and if we are found after trials and giving in to our sins and whatnot, the degenerates are to be found just as loved as those who have stayed on the path their entire lives. This is a very comforting thought that many might disagree with, but I mean, here it is, take it or leave it. 108, Jesus said, whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become like them. And what was hidden from them will be revealed. And see, this is why we can't take any of this literally, okay? It's a prime example right there of why these are all metaphors. Obviously, drinking from the mouth of Jesus would indicate taking in what he is speaking. 111, and some number that you guys, or some of you are gonna like. The heavens and the earth will roll up before you. The living who come from the living will know neither fear nor death. For it is said, whoever has self-knowledge, the world cannot contain them. And again, we seem to have this ideal of knowledge of the self is what breaks us from the black cube, of course referred here as the world containing them. 113, the disciples asked Jesus, when will the kingdom come? Again, they're not seeming to catch what he is putting down, but he answered, it will not come by watching for it. No one will be saying, look, here it is. This to me seems to be, instead of an instant rapture, like is popularized in Christianity, somewhat either of a gradual change or something that happens within that turns everything around you into heaven. And he followed up, by the way, I didn't catch this part. The kingdom of the Father is spread out over the whole earth, and people do not see it. The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas seems to promise the reader a kind of otherworldly knowledge. In fact, he says, I'll give you what no eye has seen and what no ear has heard and what has never occurred to the human mind. It is emphasized about finding the kingdom, that you are from it and you will return. In the biblical canon, it is said with great importance that none of these writings should be removed or added to. But that is exactly what man did, and it seems to continue doing. If the Bible is in fact divinely inspired and the Word of God, then it makes me wonder if these controversial findings like the Gnostic Gospels are, in a way, God's hand in putting his word right back where it goes, into the ears and the hearts of mankind.
Change me out with new components. Can you teach me how? Can you break me down and then rebuild me? Show me how. The puzzle pieces, the last blueprint, unavoidable yet feared. step back. All my time, all my lies, all of my mind destroys, fractalize, reignite. Can you change me out with new components? Can you teach me how? Can you break me down and then rebuild me? Show me how to climb out. Sentience from void, lights from the dark. Order from chaos, sentience from void, light from the dark. Witness the signs. Witness the signs that lead out of hell. The hurt do it quick, the numb do it slow, the wise do it well. Changing my eyes changes my sight, changing my mind.
We have all seen the stereotype, a monk that leaves society to reside in the mountains at a monastery where he speaks no words and hears no words spoken, and has no access to pleasures and stimulation for an undetermined amount of time. The monk also does a tremendous amount of physical labor before the rest of the night is spent sitting the fuck down and shutting the fuck up, eventually returning to society after becoming, enlightened. Today's culture will not hesitate to roll both eyes at the sound of that archetype, in the same way that Pavlov's dog would salivate at the sound of a bell that it was programmed to associate with food. So why are we programmed to roll our eyes? Well, this practice seems awfully boring, doesn't it? But why does the monk leave society? Well, he is either fed up with its drama or in despair due to ignorance of his own self. Why does he sit in silence without contact with worldly pleasures like entertainment? Well, the unspoken science of this practice has shown that when we fast from pleasures and instant gratification, the brain begins to produce its own chemical output of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin without an outside force to beckon it. And lastly, why does he return to society after this time is sacrificed? And that question we can get to later. This particular practice is one of many formats used worldwide to accelerate the process of self-completion. And note, I didn't say betterment, by the way. I said completion. Some time ago, I found myself confronted with events that, to me, meant only devastation and failure. The entire foundation that my feet walked on and depended on crumbled into rubble, and I was falling into complete loss with absolutely no answers or correct direction. Even after years of esoteric study, including alchemy, I found myself blind. The events happening outside of my control made me unable to see. Once blind to all potential and silver linings, I gave up, and that is putting it mildly. I gave up so much that I moved away and into an old house that I could afford, but needed repair as much as I did. I still don't know why, but after moving in, I left out all devices that make contact with the outside world, knowing in a way that this would in fact worsen my pain and loss. I didn't pull out a phone or install a TV. I didn't go to parties, events, or even out to eat. In fact, the meals I had were not prepared, but instead were just the minimal amount of substance I needed to live. It'd be like a handful of spinach right out of the bag, or just a straight carrot. Weeks went by, and the only thing I did was renovate the house, and that work had to be forced. Eventually, I felt a spark one day out of nowhere that was faint. The next day, it was bigger. Eventually, it was an unignorable fire that consumed my entire previous identity. Weird as it sounds, I was gone, and what replaced me was this spark that I simply allowed to take over my persona. The I that I was familiar with was a memory at best, like a dream that happened last night. It was separate from me in a way that I could actually see it and all of its habits and patterns clearly. It was as if I had been for years trying to see the bottom of a pond by moving the water out of the way and only kicking up more mud to cloud the water. After completely giving up, the water rested and the dust settled, becoming still. Glancing back at the pond, the bottom was clear to see and observe. Without analyzing or overthinking, I busted out the camera and microphone that I had been using for years on violent heavy metal music, and I filmed myself talking hella shit about Saturn. And if you're watching this, I don't have to tell you what happened next. I didn't realize at the time that I encountered and lived through an ancient practice that has been called by many names, but most familiar to us here in the West as a dark night of the soul. So in 1578, St. John of the Cross had some ideas that got his ass thrown into prison by his fellow Carmelite brothers who opposed his new ideas.
What he wrote down while imprisoned was to become a legendary portion of a much bigger picture. He wrote what's considered to be a poem called Dark Night of the Soul. This metaphorical night works like a slingshot in a way that the further back it is pulled and the more tense it gets, the more accelerated the sentient growth will be. We can see how this works in the stages here. To be clear, this process is not to be confused with depression, but more of a phase that must be allowed to happen, cannot be fast forwarded or covered up and hidden. There's no going around it, but like the serpent at the front of the cave guarding the treasure, we have to go through it to embody its benefits. It seems as though, in a way, death leads to life, in more than one sense. And although referred to in Buddhism as falling into the pit of the void, this process is a necessary part of people's spiritual evolution. Shannon Kaiser is quoted as describing it as a breaking away from the illusions of fear and ego to shift our alignment and values to what is real and true, the connection to the divine, and ultimately pave the way for your life's purpose and mission here on Earth. Within the stages of this process, there seems to be a common theme. The first stage is a sort of disruption and certainty. You will not be prepared for this. The more persona that the person is holding on to, the worse this beautiful process is going to be. Those addicted to former ideals of things around them being a certain way will have the most trouble. Stage 2 is running completely out of hope and meaning. This sounds negative, but it's necessary, as we will see. At this stage is when a person without the wisdom of sacrifice and alchemical transmutation will ask themselves, how do I get out of this? And try to throw it in reverse to save something that they are bound to shed eventually, thus postponing their awakening. This is not the way to go. If you want to get out of the dark night of the soul, then you go into it, you finish it. Stage 3 is considered rock bottom. Yeah, and by the way, sorry, this is going to be a dark one, guys. This stage 3 consists of just being there within the rock bottom. I won't say to become comfortable with this, as it's not possible, but instead to just accept this happening for what it's worth. Lay down and rest in the suffering. You will face the what is real part of yourself in your life, which is very hard to do. A person who is aware of what is happening does not try to control or drive the amount of suffering involved. At this point, we know we cannot run from our shadow. It is attached to our feet. So get to know it, say hello, and invite your shadow to brunch with your mother-in-law. At this point, it becomes known that this just might be some kind of purification. You are now the lead that is being tormented by sulfur, so to speak. So just wait. In stage 4, an unfamiliar light begins to appear. This is not literal. It is something that you just feel. You don't know what it is yet. You don't all of a sudden get a life purpose, so to speak. You simply begin to understand that there is abundance and value within yourself that can be shared. Oh, we just don't know what yet. But it seems as though all patterns and subconscious traits are now clear as day and no longer avoided. And then having seen them, they break down. Stage 5 of this process is considered authentic seeking. You will become curious about new things, as indeed you yourself are now new. You've accepted all of the things about yourself that you have been denying and things about the world that bother you and that you have avoided. Now that fear is gone and you can seek and study in a much more real and authentic way. This is done without fear. We feel as if the lead previously mentioned might have turned to gold. Stage 6 is walking the path. This part is different for everyone. The results are vastly different for each person. That would make sense considering that in a way we have individuated, as Jung would put it. Words fail at this point and wouldn't do any good anyway, because when it happens, you just know. Your value and life's purpose will just be clear and unresistant. You will embody this philosophy all the way down to your bones. It is now you. It now takes no effort to evolve yourself and the things around you, because you don't have to. You are now it instead of a bunch of words that point to it. This last stage makes me wonder if the first stage was sent to us in some kind of divine form or a message as a catalyst. So when you look back, it's as if it was supposed to happen and there's no longer grieving, loss, or regret. It is said that Christ descended to hell after crucifixion and spent 3 days there until resurrecting back to earth to teach what he learned before then ascending to heaven. Other theologians have translated this differently to say that he descended to the depths to preach his philosophy to, quote, the imprisoned, reminding me a bit of the cube that his body died on. Could this all be allegory? So let's look at some of the history behind the concept of the metaphorical death and resurrection. The term initiation seems to paint a picture of some kind of esoteric ritual or Kabbalistic sect, when in fact it is more so based on the idea of becoming conscious. And as we have learned from Jung, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. In the archetype of initiation, the participant is oftentimes tried by his greatest fears and tested by his greatest temptations. Initiation involves a kind of out-of-body experience, whether it be a classic OBE or a metaphor for releasing all bodily desires. Initiation seems to indicate a result of being aware of your own impulses and thus having complete and effortless control of oneself and a person's reaction to outside stimulus. These characters or beings that spread fear and temptation are not necessarily evil and are not demons, but instead elements of yourself being shown to you, gauging your reaction to yourself. This reminds me of the Mara depicted in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in which case involves literal death as opposed to our subject here of so-called ego death. But I mean, hey, as above, so below, right? I can't pronounce his name, but Fang, his first name being H-S-U-E-H, is quoted as saying, "The whole world is you, yet you keep thinking there is something else." This whole thing so far reminds me of Mithra, who plunged a dagger into the spine of the ox, which kind of represents the release of man from the animal nature. Book that I've been fucking with, Freddie Silva. The mind is affected and agitated in death, just as it is in initiation into the grand mysteries. The first stage is nothing but uncertainty, laborings, wanderings, and darkness. And now, arrived on the verge of death and initiation, everything wears a dreadful aspect. It is all horrors, trembling, and affrightment. But this scene, once over, a miraculous and divine light displays itself. Perfect and initiated, they are free. Crowned, triumphant, they walk in the regions of the blessed. It goes on to say, entering now into the mystic dome, he is filled with horror and amazement. He is seized with solicitude and total perplexity. He is unable to move a step forward, and he is at a loss to find the entrance to that void, which is to lead him to the place he aspires to. But now in the midst of his perplexity, the prophet or conducting hierophant suddenly lays open to him the space before the portals of the temple. I suppose hierophant there kind of alludes to the idea of a Zen master or a guru. Having thoroughly purified him, the hierophant now discloses the initiated to a region all over illuminated and shining with divine splendor. The cloud of thick darkness is dispersed, and the mind, which before was full of disconsolate obscurity, now emerges into day, replete with light and cheerfulness out of the profound depth into which it had been plunged. And then it points out here that seeing things with your own eyes can be referred to as autopsia. So, kind of a cool word there. This is considered a living resurrection, so to speak. After the initiation, the participant no longer fears death or public scrutiny, as he is now completely whole and can have certainty in the midst of uncertainty. But it is also written that the reason for no longer fearing death is that the initiate has seen what lays behind it. This is very parallel to almost every near-death experience reported. People who have been resuscitated from death come back more alive than ever. Their our demeanor has now evolved from just living and surviving to complete agreement with what is. Therefore, a sort of a permabliss. Most surprising in near-death experiences, like initiation, the results that take place do not wear off over time, like the profound realizations that come from a hallucinogen or a psychedelic experience. My only hypothesis on this is the one glaring difference between an epiphany from hallucinogens and those from initiation, near-death experiences, are that in the case of plant drugs, something from the outside is changing your point of view, whereas in the case of initiation, the change occurs from within, literally tempering you with its Gnostic wisdom. In that way, this is gnosis. Instead of receiving a message to learn from, we actually become that message and it becomes us. This doesn't necessarily eliminate hallucinogens from the equation, however. It can be utilized as a small portion of this recipe to enlightenment, but amongst other steps and trials. In fact, it was commonplace in ancient Eastern parts of the world for people to leave the body using what was called alchemical narcotics. And I was very surprised to hear rumors about our buddy L.o.t.U. We don't know if L.o.t.U. partook in this form of alchemy, but we do know that he would regularly leave his body to, quote, go for a stroll at the origin of things. Let me just say that again in case it didn't slap, because the more you ponder that sentence, the more stunning it is. But yeah, our buddy L.o.t.U. would often take his spirit for a stroll to the origins of things. Like, holy shit. In Zoroastrian initiation, priests would leave their body to go on a quest of gathering information from the great library of the above worlds. This practice was very common, actually, to many cultures, including the Maya, the Egyptians, but only undergone by the masters of this art, as an average person might not be able to download such information without going insane. It kind of sounds like a bit of a Lovecraft almost deal there. In Greece, we have the Eleusinian mysteries, and it's believed to be very old, lasted quite some time, of considerable antiquity. This school of thought was intended to elevate man above the human sphere and into the divine, and to assure his redemption by making him or her divine, thus conferring, in a way, immortality upon him. Philosophers we have heard of, like Plato, partake in Eleusinian mysteries. Although it was held secret from governments, philosophers, hierophants, and even slaves alike were all invited to partake in this ritual. One of the only rules was that you couldn't go in twice, and supposedly you didn't have to. So we don't know exactly what took place within the Eleusinian mysteries. We know that men left there having, quote, seen with their own eyes the divine source, and we know that there was a particular kind of brew involved in which we don't have the recipe anymore. But I mean, if you look closely and kind of put the pieces together, you can kind of figure it out. Much like other hallucinogens, these men most likely encountered intelligence of non-human origin that became teachers to them. And in my own personal experience of interaction with what does sure seem to be like divine beings, I was met with a sort of tough love. The beings did not speak with a language or a voice as we find familiar, but instead a more simple and elegant method was used: symbols and notions. The language was direct as can be, because, I mean, well, after all, they were me. If I was to translate these messages into a language, it would certainly come out wrong, but of course, just like any other one of these sessions or experience, you want to write down the best you can what you went through and what you learned. And this is very roughly speaking, the message that I got was like, man, you need to transmute that shit. Level the fuck up now, because you are becoming. Every momentary action is building a character in the future, inside and out. You will see the consequences of your inner self soon in the outer world. They are the same thing. You are bound to cause an effect here, and there is a reason for it. You are so overstimulated by outside occurrences that you can't feel the light within you. You are distracted from what actually matters. But it's right there, and it's easy. All you have to do is shed everything you carry on your back. You don't need any of that shit. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely got yelled at. Some people might call that the hyper slap there on the internet. Nevertheless, it goes to show that a bad trip can be a good trip if you are able to decipher it. Even though this message had no ties to any existing axioms, I was reminded of a Zen concept. A cup that is filled to the brim with liquid it's heavy and not useful and growing more and more stagnant as time goes on. However, if that cup fails to stand on its own or is knocked down by some outside force, all of the liquid inside dumps out and is indeed quite the mess. This mess on the floor fucking sucks for sure. But after we clean it up, we can see now that the cup is empty and now has a purpose once again. It can be filled with better liquid this time, like Patron or Earl Grey tea, whatever is your cup of tea. Maybe some of that weed tea that you all got now, I don't know. Whatever you want now has a place within the emptiness of this cup. Albert Einstein said, quote, "The soul given to each of us is moved by the same living spirit that moves the universe." And I'd like to take a moment to point out that the most respected scientist of all time had just called the motions of the universe to be initiated by a living spirit, something that is alive and not human. The idea here is that within the cube, we are disconnected from divine here in this particular realm, and we're distracted by the pains, pleasures, and desires of the animal nature. Almost as if the entire purpose for being on Earth is to see through these illusions and rejoin the divine while in this realm. This opens a kind of metaphysical portal for the divine to pierce into the lower gross realms through the initiate. In fact, the initiate is that portal. The initiate sees divinity for himself rather than hearing about it, thus gnosis. He now has knowledge of the above, middle, and lower worlds. Chuang-Tzu is quoted as saying, "When there is no separation between this and that, it is called the still point of the Tao." At the still point, in the center of the spiral, one can see the infinite in all things. And another initiation seems to parallel the dark night of the soul archetype is the Native American process of the spirit quest. Like many other cultures, this process begins with isolation in remote parts of the wilderness. This is followed by sensory deprivation and starvation. Within the trauma of that self-inflicted pain comes a Gnostic experience of the true self. The self that is all human beings and also the self that is all living creatures. And last but not least, the self that is the individual's particular and unique path. In all cases, we have shed our skin to reveal the new and divine. We shed our skin, metaphorically speaking, of course, unless you're a part of the Agora tribe who, to reach this state of gnosis, they conduct self-mutilation and oh, golly, read about that one. I can't believe I just said golly. What the? Yeah. Everyone just changed the video. We shed our skin, metaphorically speaking, as this means many different things, including sacrificing everything that we think we are, everything we expect the world to be. You no longer have to change the world because you have changed yourself. Paradoxically, well, changing the world. Once we are divine, as opposed to speaking of divinity, a bubble forms that just cannot be penetrated by worldly things. In Christian theology, it is written that Christ spoke the words, "Except a man be born again," resurrection, "he cannot see the kingdom of heaven," or the true and purest form of self, basically. And this seems to indicate that this process is important to undergo at some degree, lesser or more depending on the initiate. But let's be careful. At the beginning of this video, we compared this process to a slingshot, stating that the more we pull back the rubber strap, the more accelerated the rock flies. Thus, seemingly, the more suffering, the higher the sentient growth, like an accelerated evolution for consciousness. But let's remember that if you pull the straps of that slingshot too far back, the straps will break. And, well, anyone familiar with Friedrich Nietzsche doesn't need an explanation concerning that metaphor. We cannot force this. We have to let it find us. And until then, maintain and take good care of your sling. self-realization seems to tie together at least 3 of our 7 hermetic laws, cause and effect being an obvious one. As above, so below, as we know that this death is metaphorical, yet the same principles seem to apply to literal death. And most importantly, our reoccurring theme of polarity, principle that seems to point to this idea that just like the slingshot, our dark night of the soul, or initiation, or Eleusinian mysteries, or whatever else you may have it, the individuation, confrontation with the shadow, spirit quest, all these different cultures have a different word for this same process that seems to indicate that the more we are tested, the more we gain resolve. And at some point, there seems to be almost a bit of a breaking point that causes the person to, in a way, lose their mind. Or so they think at first. But really, while they're losing their mind, just like our cup that lost its stagnant water, it leaves them open to receive prana that, when used carefully, subtly, and accepted, brings out the best in a person, quite literally through the worst in them. When St. John of the Cross suffered inside of that jail cell, the literature that he came up with does not seem to be coming from a suffering man. It doesn't seem to be sourced from pain. In fact, if anything, the dark night of the soul is illumination from a man who has been inspired by humanity and from his own divine spark, in a way celebrating his untouchableness from the chaos of the outer world, considering that he now had this bubble of protection in which no worldly things could pierce. This cryptic yet religious and inspiring piece of literature from this man who simply had new ideas about the essence of what God is, and inspiration to speculate upon previous notions that we have to accept that information gets updated, and we cannot force ourselves to stick with previous ideals when presented with new information. And St. John of the Cross, I think, was kind of the Copernicus or the Giano Bruno of religion, whereas Copernicus and Giano Bruno were murdered or imprisoned because their ideas were so outside of the common norm that people were disturbed by it. But now we can definitively prove that both of them were correct. The Earth is not the center of the universe, and in fact, stars are suns with planets, as Giano Bruno pointed out, and got burned at the fucking stake for it. The guy who discovered germs was imprisoned. They called him superstitious. And I mean, look at us today, obsessed with soap and toilet paper, you know? But St. John of the Cross, I do believe, the same as Giano and Copernicus, was onto something, but a bit deeper than what occurs in physical reality. His theories are, of course, incredible, but they're shadowed by his piece of literature that we'll check out now. It seems to be coming from a man who is eager to learn, eager to transmute, and eager to take an opportunity of absolute, desolate annihilation and turn it into something worth high value. This man turned lead into gold, as well as any alchemist I can think of.
The year is -1 million or some shit. You and your cousin are down at the river collecting some crawdads and fish to bring home to feed your family when you see an enormous shadow encompass the ground. You both dive into the water because you know exactly what this shadow is. Unfortunately, your cousin's body never splashes down into the river because two gigantic clawed hands the size of Jeremy Corbell's balls swoop down on a 20-foot wingspan and rip his feet off of the earth. You know that there is no surviving this, but you don't grieve because this shit happens all the time. Instead of grieving, you're hypnotized by the most heinous sound of your cousin being shredded into little bite-sized pieces to be fed to the babies of this gigantic bird of prey. As the gargled screaming starts to die down, you realize that you are in the water. Jumping in the water made sense to avoid this first problem, but you now realize that you have an entire new set of problems. As you scramble and scrape mud to get back on land, you feel the entire bottom of the riverbed move beneath your feet. Again, you are well aware of this familiar and dreadful notion of everyday life, as nature's equivalent of a vice grip the size of a Greyhound bus clamps down on your pelvis and begins spinning in the form of a barrel roll. While spinning, your head comes up above the water for just long enough for your body to be slapped back down into the water, completely knocking the wind out of you. Because unlike your friend who was eaten alive, you are lucky enough to be drowned instead. As you are somewhat relieved by that notion, several other smaller versions of this vice grip clamp down onto your hands, arms, knees, feet, and ass. It turns out this gargantuan crocodile also had babies. Just as you lose consciousness, you realize the irony that being fed to these offspring is not any different from what you were going to do with the fish and the crawdads that you were collecting that day. Not once during this absolutely mortifying ordeal did anything cross your mind along the lines of credit scores, bills, jobs, schooling, and certificates. Because here in this place and time, you are not a person, you are food. Welcome to the everyday life of the early Denisovans and many other species of human beings that have mysteriously went extinct. But for those who survived, a day came that was a total game changer that would set the course of life in a completely different direction for your entire species. Through primitive grunts or brassly drawn symbols on stone, word spreads that there is a way to be completely immune from this brutality of Foodchain. Later that week, as you approach the glowing light that so far in your life has been merely viewed at a distance, you realize that this glow is not trying to eat you like the rest of the world is. Being no longer afraid but respectful of this ominous glow, you realize that every other creature on this planet is deathly afraid of the flame, but you no longer are, and you and your kin settle down to get warm near this newfound sanctuary. You find peace for the first time, a peace in which you didn't even realize you could experience. For the first time, your species were within a bubble that would not be penetrated by the monsters surrounded you. You can keep your eyes fixed on this glow instead of having your head on a swivel 24/7. The glowing eyes that you know are in the distance belonging to creatures whose one and only goal is to can kill you, only watch in amazement from a distance because you have conquered a part of nature that no other species ever has. Aeons later, a brilliant mind belonging to Manly P. Hall would coin the prana, or divine spark within us, as an archetype called the inner flame. And this is no coincidence because as your head comes off that swivel and you gaze into that fire completely still, you become the first human being to look within. There are still monsters though. To hide from the cats, you could go into the nooks and crannies of earth. To hide from the crocodiles of the water, you could climb up a tree. To hide from the giant birds of prey, you could go into the caves. But in every single one of these places of safety is the giant and cunning serpent waiting for you. Unable to escape the serpent, you had to fight, later creating a mythology that is still used worldwide. But now at the center of your people is a glowing glowing light that none of those creatures would dare approach. Even though you are not yet at the top of the food chain, you have found a way to transcend it. For you, this is simply relaxation. Those who gazed into that fire would continue looking deeper inward, finding more and more of the worlds blooming within us all. Life for your species slowly begins to turn from survival mode to exploration of the self, an activity that would later be called Zen. The world that we all live in today has an entirely new kind of monster. A monster that, instead of eating our flesh, wants to consume us by our toils. But being that we are the same as our ancestors were, there sure as is a way to transcend these monsters as well.